I've been doing this for over 25 years. We've studied over 4,000 near-death experiences. Near-death experiences are, in a word, real. I mean, how can one not be fascinated about wondering what happens after we die? Yes, their consciousness separates from the body, typically going above their physical body. Often at the end of that tunnel, they may have a beautiful, mystical, unearthly light. Actually leaves the vicinity of their physical body and observes things, say, city blocks away, even over a mile away. The vision can be much different than earthly vision. In fact, often people having a near-death experience describe 360-degree vision. People having a near-death experience often say, "This feels like my real home." God is the most common word near-death experiencers use, but it's a word of convenience. The substantial majority don't want to leave that heavenly realm. They do not want to return to their earthly life. So here they are observing their own resuscitation while under general anesthesia in the operating room. And this is where it gets just dang interesting. I mean, here they're...
Right now, this is where it gets interesting.
Well, yeah.
This is something that I think is a really big deal, that if more people knew that the research that you've done is out there, that it's available, that it could really probably help people in a lot of ways. I mean, certainly people can learn more about, you know, what's potentially coming next, but it really gave me, as I'm preparing for this episode, a sense of calm and peace and acceptance, and like it's going to be okay in after you die, when you die even. So.
Yeah. That's absolutely true, Matt, and we've got a lot of evidence to back that up. I mean, how can one not be fascinated about wondering what happens after we die?
Yeah.
Well, near-death experiences seem to provide some very significant, detailed information. We've got a lot to talk about as we develop what you're already aware of as a remarkably positive message of hope.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So Dr. Jeffrey Long, if you could maybe just as we prior to getting started, maybe just introduce yourself and tell us, you know, what's your day job, and then what's your passion, what's your hobby?
Sure. Well, I'm a radiation oncology physician, which is the use of radiation to treat cancer. I'm practicing full-time in Kentucky. So that's my one full-time job. My other, if you will, full-time job is, as you said, my passion, and that's my study of near-death experiences. I've been doing this for over 25 years. I love it. It has absolutely been life-changing to me as I've learned about near-death experiences and some of the important insights and messages for literally all of humanity, which we'll get into.
Yeah, for sure. Can't wait to get into it. So what is a near-death experience? Let's start there. What by definition, what is it?
Well, by definition, as the name implies, you're near death. In other words, you're so physically compromised that you're unconscious or even clinically dead with an absent heartbeat. So that's how near death you are. But it also involves the term experience. So at this time when you shouldn't have any conscious remembrance because you're unconscious from physical compromise, you do have that experience, and that's the experience part of a near-death experience.
So no heartbeat, so no brain function. So scientifically, so if someone's hooked up, and if someone's in a hospital and has a near-death experience, what do the various instruments report?
Oh, sure. You know, again, near-death experiences can occur while you're physically unconscious or clinically dead. But yes, a number of patients have reported near-death experiences while they're in the hospital, while they're being very carefully medically monitored. And it's very clear that their heart stops, and the monitoring can include not only measures of heart activity. And by the way, Matt, once your heart stops, which is a common precipitating event in a near-death experience, the moment your heart stops, well, immediately blood stops flowing to the brain. And then 10 to 20 seconds after blood stops going to the brain, the EEG or electroencephalogram, that's a measure of brain cortical outside activity, goes absolutely flat. At that time, it should be absolutely impossible to have any conscious experience because your brain is measurably flatlined. And yet people do, literally by the hundreds, report near-death experiences after their heart stops after cardiac arrest.
And so I want to follow along this same line of questioning, but one kind of sidestep question really quick then. So as the consciousness leaves the body, is there an amount of time that it's just you can't be out of your body for more than 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour prior to your body accepting you back.
Sure. When you have that episode of unconsciousness, or especially if it's clinical death where your heart stops beating, your body is not going to be able to physiologically recover after a certain period of time. That can range from 7 to 10 minutes in most situations of heart stoppage. For these rare events of what we call cold water drowning, people have been reported to be able to be resuscitated after even over 30 minutes. So it's somewhat variable on the circumstances that the heart stops.
Okay. So if you're chilled, if you're put on ice, then you can last a little bit longer. That's
right. Lasts a little bit longer, and children tend to bounce back from that kind of cold water drowning more than adults. So,
okay.
But you're not talking. Your point's very valid. I mean, you're not talking about hours that you can have an absent heartbeat and be able to recover physiologically. So it's that's the time. During that time is when people have their near-death experiences.
But you've studied how many of these cases?
Sure. In over 25 years I've been investigating this, we've studied over 4,000 near-death experiences.
Wow.
And we actually have them posted on our research website, nderf.org. It's the largest volume of near-death experiences available for scientific study that have ever been investigated. So it's very exciting to have that huge data set that we can learn more about near-death experiences than was ever possible before. And then above and beyond that, in the websites that we collect, when people share them, we have like over 80 different questions. So heroically, all these people have filled out a very detailed survey. So it's not only the large number of people of near-death experiences we study, but it's that very detailed responses to those innumerable, it seems, survey questions. So that's allowed us to learn about near-death experiences at a depth that we've never been able to learn before.
And how do you, if at all, is there ways to, I'm sure you can tell when someone is just posting something or making it up or creating a story, creating a false story. But in what ways do you check and verify and make sure that these are legitimate NDEs?
Mm-hmm. Great question. We have a very detailed process when we get a near-death experience. Certainly, as a physician, I can medically see if the circumstances they describe medically add up, if it makes sense, and that's one way you can reject them. Another way you do that is about 95% of the people that share with us allow it to be posted on the web. So there's literally tens of thousands of people reading each of these posted near-death experiences on the website. And if there's anything that doesn't add up, we generally hear from someone say, hey, this isn't wrong, it doesn't add up, it just doesn't make sense. But above and beyond that, it's sort of what real is consistently observed. So we know the pattern of near-death experiences, and we know what to look for, and as a result of that, we're quite confident the overwhelming majority of people that go to all that effort are being honest. Of course, when we post them on the website, they're anonymous. There's absolutely no incentive for someone to take the substantial amount of time to answer all those questions and falsify a near-death experience, because they're not going to be recognized individually. We don't pay anyone. There's no real incentive for anybody to do that. So, and then finally, the near-death experiences we have in our study population match really to a T what other investigators are finding with the near-death experiences in their investigations. And there's literally dozens of near-death experience investigators, and actually well over 200 scholarly papers, articles on near-death experience have been published in some of the world's leading medical and scientific journals. So we have a lot of different steps that we can go through to help make sure that the near-death experiences shared with us are, in a word, real.
And so is there a way to just as like to just confirm that, yes, this person was in an accident, that this person had a life-threatening kind of a situation? Is there a way to check in the newspaper, a way to check, that sort of thing?
Yeah. The people that share will often reference the newspaper article, their close brush with death, and there's a lot of other things. We found, early on in my 25 years ago, I was more interested in checking that out, and over again, it checked out. This really happened. So at this point in time, we rely on the honesty of people, their integrity in sharing a very detailed near-death experience. And don't forget, these are profoundly personal experiences. So people that have near-death experiences often consider them to be, if you will, sacred. So they're much less likely to embellish or diminish what they consider to be their biggest life event that they ever had. But with all the other process that we have, very detailed process to help validate them, we're quite corroborated with near-death experiences, both published in the scientific and medical literature and acquired by other folks that collect near-death experiences and then post them up. Between all of these validation steps, we're quite confident that what we're seeing is the real thing. And above and beyond that, if somebody submits a falsified near-death experience, it really doesn't change what we know about near-death experiences as a whole. If there's a person who falsifies it and shares some off-the-wall weird thing about the near-death experiences, and that's not corroborated by thousands of other near-death experiences, it's really not affecting our knowledge, our understanding of near-death experiences as a whole.
So what are people seeing? So they get into an accident and they leave their body. How do they explain the experience that they're having? What do they see? What do things look like? What's happening?
Sure. We talked about the experience part of a near-death experience, and you're absolutely right. That's a very typical first step of a detailed near-death experience, is their consciousness separates from the body, typically going above their physical body. And from that vantage point, they can see that accident. Or if their heart stopped, they can often see the frantic efforts of people trying to bring them back to life. So out-of-body experience, a typical first element that happens in a near-death experience. Now, while no two near-death experiences are the same, they may go on to describe passing into or through a tunnel. Often at the end of that tunnel, they may have a beautiful, mystical, unearthly light. Then they may pass into a unearthly, often called a heavenly realm, a realm of beauty. They're typically feeling overwhelming peace, an overwhelming sense of, they often describe love. Peace and love are among the two most common descriptive words people have to describe their near-death experience. They may see some of their prior or all of their prior life in what we call a life review. They may encounter deceased loved ones. Humans or, interestingly, pets have been described in near-death experiences. And around this time, as their experience progresses, they may be in a realm of beauty that is so great. There may be buildings, landscapes, and they may describe colors, like in the flowers in this landscape, that are beautiful beyond anything earthly possible. They may hear music that they recognize as being beyond anything possible on earth due to its beauty. And then at the end of the near-death experience, many of them are at a moment of decision, where they are often other beings around them, and there may be a dialogue. Most of the time when the near-death experience ends, boom, they end up back in that physical body trying to recover from that life-threatening event. But a minority of near-death experiencers may be asked to make a decision. Do you want to stay here in this beautiful, unearthly, heavenly realm, or do you want to go back to everything you've known for your entire prior life, your earthly life?
Mm-hmm. So let's back up a little bit and dive into a few of those things in a little bit more detail, just based on all 4,000, all the commonalities and the similarities that you see between all of the different explanations and sort of experiences that people have had. So you said most of the time it's a rising above the accident. But there's times when they're backing up from it. There's times when they're at level with whatever's happened. Is there percentage wise? Is it 90% they're rising above? Is it 10%? Is it 50% they're rising above? What does that look like?
Yeah. It's probably 95% right. Their consciousness is above their body.
Okay.
And they're actually seeing and often hearing those ongoing physical events. So it's typically high enough up that they can get a view of the area around their body. They may describe it often as in the corner of a room or often up near the ceiling. As far as their consciousness going level with their physical body, that's probably only about 5%. Okay. So by and large, these out-of-body experiences involve that consciousness over the body, seeing ongoing earthly events. And remarkably, it's not just a matter of their consciousness being directly above or in the vicinity of their physical body. We have literally scores of near-death experiences where that out-of-body experience, that conscious point of reference, actually leaves the vicinity of their physical body and observes things like you would say city blocks away, even over a mile away. And when they make those observations and then they so often come back and check out what was the accuracy, the validity of what they saw, remarkably, almost invariably, what they saw close to their body or far from their physical body accurate down to the finest details. I mean, absolutely impossible for them to have that kind of information, that kind of visual awareness, unless their consciousness, their point of reference, really was actually above their body or even far from their physical body, far outside of any possible physical sensory awareness.
Yeah, I want to go into maybe a couple of examples of that. I heard a couple on the other podcast, so I'm hoping to hear a couple of new ones. But you mentioned a horse accident and a car accident. Those were over a mile away, I think you mentioned. So that's fascinating. What about time? As they're after they leave their body? Does 5 minutes feel like 5 minutes? Does it feel like an hour? What any time dilation?
Oh, yeah, great question,
If that's
Matt.
the right
One of
word.
the most commonly observed things in a near-death experience is that time is radically different than earthly time, and it typically seems to be a dilation of time in the sense that in the near-death experience, particularly when they're in these unearthly heavenly realms, what could be earthly time in terms of, I mean, don't forget, they're unconscious or clinically dead, often minutes, less than an hour, and yet the near-death experience can have events that would literally stretch out over hours, even over a day, has been reported. So they're processing events, information, awareness around them that is far more rapid than would be possible during their earthly everyday life. And in fact, to corroborate that, we asked a very key question in our survey, and that was we asked them directly about how was your level of consciousness and alertness during your near-death experience compared to your earthly everyday life. And about 75%, three-quarters, will say that their level of consciousness and alertness during their near-death experience was greater than that of their earthly everyday life, which is just amazing. I mean, think about it. They're unconscious or clinically dead, and yet their consciousness is accelerated even beyond what they've been aware of in their earthly life.
Yeah, fascinating. The consciousness that they are, that is, the light, the tunnels, and just kind of the colorations and the things that they see. How do they? I guess I want to dive into kind of the tunnel and how that works. But you mentioned buildings and seeing bright colors of buildings. Are those real buildings? Are those solid buildings? Are they energy color buildings? What are those? What's going on there?
Yeah, that's another great question. We're talking about being in that unearthly heavenly realm. So when they see these buildings, they're analogous to what we know in our earthly life, except they're far more magnificent, larger, far more beautiful. And so they are analogous and yet in very important ways different. The other important thing to know about this unearthly heavenly realm that so many near-death experiencers describe is it's not a geographically separate physical environment. It is a very much non-physical environment. In other words, movement is non-physical. Communication is essentially always telepathic. I mean, instantaneous communication of what they're thinking, context, seemingly without any possibility of misunderstanding. So it's literally a very non-physical environment, very different from what we know during our earthly everyday lives. And that's what the buildings and the colors and landscapes are all about in a near-death experience.
Would you say it's an energy-based or a light-based environment? Is that kind of how it's described? Because so if you're seeing buildings in this heavenly realm, it's not the same buildings from the earthly realm, just in from a different color. You're talking about a completely different set of buildings, a completely different landscape.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When they're in these unearthly heavenly realms, it's not like they see buildings and say, oh, I knew that building. That's familiar from my prior earthly life. I mean, these are completely different. Ditto for the landscapes. I mean, they're not anything where they say, oh, this is familiar. I know that. No, these are completely unknown to them from their prior earthly life experience. Again, they have that overwhelming beauty, that overwhelming sort of fascination that they have there. I mean, they are often just go over word after word after word describing how wonderful this environment is, how beautiful it is, how much they feel connected to this. So it's very different from anything that you would describe in your earthly everyday life. And they don't really, when near-death experiences describe that, they almost never use phrases like, well, this is analogous to what, this is similar to. I mean, this is just a completely different realm of existence, if you will. And you know, light and energy is probably a good way to conceptualize it, but this is so different from anything that we have on earthly life. I mean, even after studying over 4,000 near-death experiences, about all I can say is what it's not. It's not physical, earthly. It's non-physical. It's something where movement can be extremely rapid. Vision can be much different than earthly vision. In fact, often people having a near-death experience describe 360-degree vision. They're suddenly and simultaneously visualizing and processing visual information in their near-death experience, front, back, right, left, up, down. Technically, proper word would be spherical vision. So again, they're having senses, overwhelming emotions of love and peace beyond anything they knew on earth. They may have those kind of hyperactive senses, something that they, again, didn't know from their earthly life. But it's kind of, you have to think about this. You know, we're so used to our earthly life. This is just a radically different environment when they're in these unearthly realms.
So they can, at the point in time anyway, that they rise above their body, they can see the physical world, but they can also see the heavenly world. But what percentage would you say describe this 360-degree spherical vision?
Yeah. Well, spherical vision is uncommon. You're probably talking about under 10% of people that have a near-death experience, so it's not common. And actually, when they have that out-of-body experience, typically at that point in time, they're not visualizing unearthly realms. If they're above their physical body, they're aware of and processing, hearing, seeing what's going on in ongoing earthly events. It's often, if they pass through the tunnel at the other end, they may be in that unearthly realm, or they may be suddenly pass over into that unearthly realm, and then that's where a number of people have spherical vision. And by the way, while I'm thinking about it, interestingly, I interviewed a lady named Vicky, born totally blind. To her, vision was unknown and unknowable. So she had a bad car accident, and I know what your viewers are thinking. Nope, she wasn't driving. She had a inebriated patron at a bar she was singing at. She was a very gifted singer, and unfortunately was trying to get her home and had a bad car wreck. First time Vicky had vision, she was in that out-of-body experience over her body, and she didn't even know what it was because vision was unknown. So it was only after she correlated the feel of a ring her father had given her and her long hair that she'd previously known only by touch, suddenly realized that was her down there. Vicky had that spherical vision, and in fact, when I interviewed her, I tried to tell her how the rest of us in our earthly life have these so-called pie-shaped visual fields because of the location of our eyes in our head. And Vicky literally laughed at me. She said that can't be. Its vision is spherical. That was the only thing she knew in her life, and it made no sense to her at all that those of us that live our earthly lives could have our vision so limited in a way that we know throughout our entire life.
Is there a point in time where, or are there instances where people can see the heavenly realm off in a distance, or the tunnel and the physical world, and or anything from a heavenly nature and the physical world? Like what is the heavenly world look like after you rise, after you exit your body?
Yeah, in general, people they have that out-of-body experience, and then a common next element is the tunnel. So they may see an entrance to their tunnel in their ongoing earthly physical observations down there, and they see something that looks very different. A tunnel, they may say they feel drawn toward that tunnel, and that's how they actually enter that tunnel. But these unearthly, beautifully detailed heavenly realms typically involve a departure from observations of ongoing earthly events. I mean, this is a completely different realm they're in. I mean, and they're in it. But we're in this beautiful unearthly realms. Again, common descriptors, beautiful landscapes. There may be fields, there may be trees, there may be, again, flowers with beautiful colors, music, other beings, either beings that they've known that have deceased from their prior earthly life. These are loving reunions too, by the way. Or they may be, they often will say these are beings that feel familiar, but they just are not aware of them from their prior life. Interestingly, in these unearthly realms, while that sounds incredibly exotic and very different from anything we know in our earthly life, remarkably, people having a near-death experience often say, this feels like my real home. This is where I belong. I'm back home. I've returned. And so you have that remarkable sense. And all this, while this is going on, again, overwhelmingly positive motions. I mean, think about that. Here they were a split moment ago in a life-threatening event, often recovering from what may end their life. And here they are feeling no pain at all, beautiful, unearthly emotions off the scale of anything they know, an accelerated consciousness, communication, as we said, telepathic, nothing they've ever known on Earth. So it's a very, that's a pretty good summary of what was most commonly described in these unearthly heavenly realms.
Okay. Yeah, and I want to dive into a lot of that. I want to dive into the beings and more, so I'm going to ask about those. But back to the tunnel for a second. Mm-hmm. So is there ever any correlation as to where the tunnel appears? Is the tunnel always above? Is it always at their side? Can it be going back into the earth? Is there any correlation between where people describe this tunnel appearing?
Sure. For the great majority, the tunnel seems to be above their point of consciousness, less commonly sort of around the level of their consciousness, like the consciousness over their body, and then sort of horizontally, if you will, there's a tunnel entrance. Or they may just simply lose all awareness of ongoing earthly events in terms of seeing or hearing it, and then boom, they're in a tunnel. So and that's actually probably the most common scenario, is they're having that, they may have that out-of-body experience, and then boom, when they're in the tunnel, I mean, they're like in a tunnel, so you can't really, look around and see earthly events. Now, the tunnel's variably described. Movement is typically very rapid through the tunnel, and interestingly, even for people that have had claustrophobia, it's essentially never described as claustrophobic. The tunnel can either be just a nondescript, if you will, seemingly unformed tunnel, or there can be some people have described, as they pass through the tunnel, being aware, this is uncommon, but they may see seeming like other beings outside of the tunnel, or get a sense that there's that unearthly environment outside of the tunnel. Very uncommon. By far the most common scenario, passing through the tunnel, and then that unearthly, mystical, beautiful light at the end of the tunnel is the most common trip through the tunnel.
But it's for sure. And how many? What percentage of the cases? I guess if they're out of their body for long enough that the tunnel should or could or would appear, what percentage of the NDEs see or experience the tunnel phenomenon?
Yeah. As far as we'll back up a little bit, that out-of-body experience we've talked about, where you're actually seeing ongoing earthly events, that's actually only about 45%. The other 55%, boom, they're in that tunnel, or they're in that unearthly realm. So I want to emphasize that. So as far as people that actually provide a description of the tunnel, that's probably around 20%. Okay. So for many people, they either have that out-of-body experience, and then boom, their experience ends, or they may be going through a tunnel and the experience ends, or for the more detailed near-death experiences, they're in that beautiful unearthly realm. So that's the percentages.
Okay. I came up with this crazy theory 10 years ago or so, way before I knew anything about your work or anything. And I want you to just be able to either discount it or say maybe there's something there. So, and this was when I first heard about near-death experiences and this idea of a tunnel. And so the thought was, could it potentially be possible that what they're seeing is the sun, is a direct tunnel path of light that's coming from the sun to them, and that the beings that our body, that our spirit, the spirit that we are, is a light-based spirit that could have actually originated from the sun, but I think that's besides the point. Could they be traveling? And that's why I asked, if it's nighttime, could the tunnel appear and take them through the earth and to the sun on the other side of the earth? And could time be dilated because of the immense amount of gravity that exists at the sun? When you as you travel to the sun and you meet the Creator, and this is I don't know that I buy this even personally, but could gravity and time be influenced because they're actually traveling to the sun, near the sun, to the center of the sun, to like physically, if they really are going somewhere, could that be where they're going?
That's an interesting hypothesis, and it reminds me that what we don't know about near-death experiences exceeds what we do know. So I'm always delighted to hear new hypotheses, because that's how we learn. That's how we're open-minded about investigating near-death experiences. Now, as far as tunnels going downward, that's rare. It's quite rare. Generally, they're more horizontal or upwards. As far as passing through the tunnel toward the sun as we know it in our solar system, probably not. That's not corroborated by a lot of near-death experiencers. They don't emerge from the tunnel and see a sun or any kind of star. When they emerge from that tunnel, they're in that unearthly, non-physical realm. And so it's not like there's a particular sun that is the predominant part of their visual awareness. So
but if they were inside it, they wouldn't see it. They would just be surrounded with light and be surrounded with the beauty of the non-physical world potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going down. You're passing down the right direction because they're definitely non-physical when they're in the tunnel. So they're definitely generally not seeing their physical body. They're generally moving. They may describe it at enormously high speeds. So there's something going on at that point in time. It seems to be, and I like your hypothesis in the sense that it's a transition. So I think that would be very consistent with what we see in near-death experiences, that the tunnel is, if you will, a transition between what they were observing or knew in their physical life, and they're passing on to something beyond that. And, as far as the connection of light or, certainly non-physicality, I think that's all certainly what near-death experiencers describe. I mean, there's no way they could be physical when they're moving through a tunnel at a high rate of speed.
Yeah, I mean, they're going somewhere. It's probably ridiculous, but it's at least, I wanted to ask you about it because it's something that I've thought about for years as a possibility for where we go once we actually die.
And I want to, just to take that and run, I don't want to lump all near-death experiences in one single category and say this is what they all do. So there's going to be different. There's no two near-death experiences that are identical. So for having raised that possibility, I'll definitely be more open-minded to that. And gosh, hey, Matt, I'll get back with you if we find an experience or two where they seem to come through that and it seems to be some kind of relevance to a sun or something like that. Because again, they're near-death experiences, while we're talking about their similarities, they certainly also have some differences and characteristics resulting in no two near-death experiences, and I'll use the abbreviation NDEs. No two NDEs are identical.
Right. Yeah, it'd be interesting to if you do think about it a bit more. It would be interesting to try to understand for the people who did experience significant time dilation, or the people that did come in contact with quote unquote God. The direction that they traveled, if there's anything to that, So
yeah, fascinating. We'll keep open-minded to that.
Yeah, cool. So the beings that come to people, that come to the soul, that people are, when they approach people, do they approach them above the body in the earthly realm? Do they approach them after they've traveled? Is it both? Where does that connection take place?
Sure. Now, in these unearthly realms, if they're encountering other beings, typically they're going to be, they can be above them or far more commonly sort of at their same level. They're on, ground, or they're basically situated on a level area, relative level area. But the beings will typically approach them. They can be variably described. They can be anywhere from amorphous light beings, and yet they feel they have that personality, that intelligence, and that they can communicate. More likely, they may be anthropomorphic, and yet often described as, while they have like a head and a body, they look very different from what we know in earthly life. They may be...
Tell me anthropomorphic. What does that mean?
Oh, again? That means human-like. Yeah, so they can be described as like humans, but they're different because their body shape is different, what they're wearing's different, and they may have that sense of light about them. So, and again, don't forget, in this unearthly realm, they're non-physical. So these are beings that are not like what would be anything we could even, a lot of us even conceive of on Earth. But when these beings approach them, they usually have a strong sense of love. There's often described a loving connection. They feel the love of this other being. Interestingly, there can be some dialogue. There can be a lot of back and forth. And so these beings are nothing like ghosts or anything scary. I mean, there's very positive parts of the near-death experience where they're interacting, they may be sharing information. They may ask these beings, questions, what's going on. So they seem to be a very important role. They often instill some sense of peace, love, acceptance, and just helps make the whole near-death experience be like the great, great majority of very positive experiences.
And what percentage of the time would you say that the person having the NDE is familiar with the being, knows who the being is?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, as far as deceit, we're probably up around 20 to 25% of the time they'll encounter some deceased loved ones.
Okay.
So it's at, again, most don't, but there's also, an equivalent percentage, maybe even a little bit more than 20, 25% will encounter these beings that are, obviously present spiritual beings, if you will, in the unearthly realm. So, and actually they can even encounter or be aware of these spiritual beings even when they're in that out-of-body state earlier. So that can start even early in the near-death experience at that point in time too.
Do you have any sense but in studying the 25% or so where the person who's dying meets someone that they know, have you found any correlation between why that happens versus why someone might meet someone that they don't know? Is there anything specific to the individual who's having the NDE or the entity or the people that are coming back to greet them? Is there anything there?
Yeah, in studying over 4,000 near-death experiences, I simply can't find any correlation or anything that would seem to be a trigger as to why you would encounter deceased loved ones or why you would encounter exclusively people that are, spiritual beings but not known from the prior earthly life. And that you're getting into one of the great mysteries of near-death experience. I co-authored a scholarly book chapter where we looked at 25 prior years of near-death experience research. And the conclusion of this chapter for me and my co-investigators was we really remarkably couldn't find any demographic variable that really predicted who would have a near-death experience when they nearly die, which, by the way, is only about 10 to 20% of people will have a near-death experience and nearly die. 80 to 90% won't. So we couldn't really find any demographic variable from any prior research that would predict who would have a near-death experience when they had a close brush with death, or what the content would be in any way.
When they're clinically dead, would they have to be clinically dead to do that?
You can
in this study.
Yeah, the near-death experience, you have to be unconscious or clinically dead. Certainly, so physically compromised that you're, unconscious. So there shouldn't be any conscious remembrance, but that's when the conscious remembrance described like we're sharing here would be a near-death experience. So that would be it. But yeah, incredibly with research and then subsequently to the publication of that book that had that chapter, we really can't find any good correlation with a person's demographic and where they lived, what they believed, male, female, age. None of that seems to correlate with the kind of who they encounter during their near-death experience, when they encounter it. So it's one of the great mysteries of near-death experience. It's a good example of what we don't know about these near-death experiences is greater than what we do know.
Right.
I feel like sort of a pioneer even after 25 years.
100% you are.
And so I think that's what makes it so exciting. I love that mystery. I love that fascinating bit by bit as we start to learn more and more about what near-death experiences are, and every step along that journey of discovery is actually just sort of like opens up my eyes even further, and I'm even more respectful and amazed with near-death experiences as I go through this journey of research, even knowing far more now than I did when I started 25 years ago.
Yeah, it's incredible, the work that you're doing and the knowledge that you're bringing to the general public, to people who choose to educate themselves about this through listening to you, through the studies that you've done. And I think the one of the best parts about you is that you're not biased. You're not attempting to prove something. You're not attempting to prove a theory. You're not going into it with an idea of this is the afterlife or this is what happens. You're really just open to all of the stories and attempting to find all the different commonalities between everything that everybody's experienced and put it together and say, okay, this is what we're seeing, regardless of what I believe or what I think, this is what people are saying about their near-death experience. So I really appreciate the work you're doing.
You bring a really good point there, and that's absolutely true. From the very dawn of my starting my research 25 years ago, I was interested in the truth, the reality of near-death experiences. I was literally, when I started, a blank slate. I just said, let the evidence speak for itself, and that I will learn and I will understand that and share with the world. But I don't go into this with any particular agenda. And I tried to, well, not try, I think I've been quite successful in maintaining that scientific rigor. I'm a physician. I make my decisions to how to treat patients with cancer based on the evidence, on the reasoning from that evidence, because that's how I can best save lives. Same thing with the near-death experience research. We let the evidence speak for itself. We let the reasoning from that evidence guide my understandings and what I share about near-death experiences. And then above and beyond that, one of the glories about this type of research is its amazing ability to be transparent. Over 4,000 near-death experiences published on the website. I mean, anybody, and by the way, it's now published in over 30 different languages, parts of that website. So anybody, pretty much anybody on the planet can go read these amazing near-death experiences themselves. The exact word-for-word experience shared by the people that actually had them. And you can see for yourself exactly what I'm talking about. There's all that evidence times thousands of near-death experience accounts.
Yeah, if I had any time whatsoever extra in my life, I would be reading these things because, it's phenomenal. Yeah. So I want to keep it at least I want to try to keep it somewhat linear, so because I think that what a lot of people haven't done with interviews with you is really dive down into each of these individual, data points that occur throughout the near-death experience. And it's just so fascinating to try to understand each one of those things. Okay, well, now they're being approached by these beings and it's, what are the commonalities between each of those individual things? So I want to just back it up just a little bit. When people are approached by the beings, and so you said it's about 25% people that they know. Do the people that they know typically take the shape and form of that individual during their life? How do they know that that's the person?
Sure. Encountering deceased loved ones, and by the way, that's part of the research that validates the reality of near-death experiences. When they encounter these people, especially in the unearthly realm, 96% of the time in my study, and corroborated by another major study, 96% of the time these people are deceased. These are not people that they're encountering that were alive, that they knew in their life, that they were familiar with. I mean, these are people that died during their earthly life prior to their near-death experience.
I'd assumed it was 100%, but 96.
It's 96%.
Okay.
It's a real mystery to me how they, about where that 4% comes from. But for, unlike dreams or hallucinations, where the great majority of beings you encounter are people alive at the time of that altered consciousness. That's not true at all with near-death experiences. But anyway, the fascinating thing is that when they encounter these beings that they knew in their earthly life that are deceased, even if the earthly relationship was strained or there was a problem, these are essentially always joyous reunions. And amazingly, even if the person who had died prior to their near-death experience, if they died of, say, a very chronically disfiguring accident or illness, they essentially always are picture-perfect health in the near-death experience. We have a small series of people that encountered deceased loved ones who had amputations. They'd lost an arm or a leg. In every single one of these encounters in my small series, they have all four of their limbs. So these are people that are all literally whole, and they're, interestingly too, if they died at a very advanced age, they may appear years or even decades younger in the near-death experience than at the time of their death. And again, essentially always picture-perfect health. And interestingly, if the being they encountered died in, say, early infancy, they may appear as a child many years older than the time of the death of that beloved infant. So one of the real fascinations about and yet they're immediately recognized. They immediately know who they are. Almost never do you hear a near-death experiencer say, well, wait, who are you? What are you from? Recognition against part of that accelerated consciousness thing, boom, it's instantaneous. They know that's the person. They immediately can start dialoguing with that person as they might have during their earthly life.
And it's all telepathic communication, obviously.
Yeah, essentially always, again, non-physical. I mean, here we are talking, I have my vocal cords move, it creates a sound, comes out of my mouth, goes into your ears, resonates nerves and goes, and that's how you process. It's physical. That's how we all communicate. Not so at all during near-death experiences in that unearthly heavenly realm. Communication is, and telepathic is the best word, but it really doesn't convey the depth of communication. Communication is extremely rapid. It can be large volumes of information, instantaneously shared, and they often say, well, it's not just that, it's the whole context, the emotion around it, the sense, the deeper understanding. It's that conveyance of everything that is related to that, instantaneous and without any possibility of misunderstanding. I don't even think I can recall any near-death experiences in those communication in the unearthly realm where there seemed to be ambiguity or misunderstanding. I mean, this, again, it's completely different from what we have here on Earth, where tragically there can be that misunderstanding or misinterpretation of what other people are saying. I mean, gloriously in the afterlife, that's all past, and communication is beautifully shared instantaneously and completely.
Yeah, it would be super cool to find some correlation between, like, why am I being greeted by people that I know, my deceased ancestors versus beings that I don't know. If there was some, but I guess, yeah, there's so many possibilities as to why that could be the case. If reincarnation is real, if all of your ancestors have chosen to come back versus to stick around and wait for you, I mean, it's just, you can go down so many rabbit holes with why that might be the case. But for the 75% or so of people that are greeted by beings that are not their family, or close loved ones, what is that? How does that experience differ?
Yeah, when they're unfamiliar beings, it's not like in earthly life where we meet a stranger. I mean, they're typically immediately, there seems to be that connection, that interaction, that sense of loving presence is often described, and so it's really immediately a bond, if you will, and so right off the bat, there can be a lot of sharing, can be a lot of communication. It can just be, sometimes if there's no communication, it's just like a loving presence. And that's very reassuring to the person that has a near-death experience. So there's a variety of different scenarios, but they're all, they all seem to be positive, a part of a positive near-death experience when they interact with them. And interestingly, too, while we're on the topic, it's not unusual for a near-death experiencer to say, this being or beings I encountered is so familiar. It seems like we knew them. I know them, but I just can't recall that from my prior earthly life. Mm-hmm. So again, that raises exactly what you just said there. Is this remembrance of reincarnation? Is this some type of life they shared previously? So that's another really fascinating thing. And I think that would probably explain some of these interactions of unknown yet familiar beings that are described.
Yeah, or did the beings, for sure, reincarnation as a possibility as to why past life, etc. But could they have met these beings not in a past life, but the last time they died? Mm-hmm. I mean, it could be the same being that connected with them at the moment of death in a prior life, and the prior life before that, and the prior life before that.
Absolutely, no question. And I think you just raise a really. That's why I love these talks, because every time I hear, talk with people, like always, it's like I take a little, gem of insight back with me. But you're absolutely right. It's not a matter of prior physical earthly lives. I mean, these are familiar beings. They could be familiar from those prior existence, and probably are in that unearthly heavenly realm. I mean, they may have had an enormous amount of shared time, interaction in that unearthly heavenly realm, and they're familiar. They just can't quite put their finger on it. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that would be very consistent with what I'm seeing in so many of these accounts. I think it's you can't be narrow-minded and say it was only prior earthly lives or only prior heavenly realm lives. It could be anything or everything or both.
Do people as they're dying ever see other people being greeted by these beings? Or do they ever see other animal spirits being greeted by these beings. Any descriptions of that?
There have been a number of near-death experiences where they describe awareness of what they know are deceased humans that are being greeted by these spiritual beings, if you will. I mean, sometimes there can be lights all sort of converging on this area where they're being greeted. There may be a descriptor of like a line and of deceased people standing there, and they're sort of moving forward. So there's several different scenarios where seems to be that they're imparting to the near-death experiencer, hey, this seems to be the end point of people that in their earthly life, they're going to be greeted, they're going to be aware, and they're going to be welcomed, certainly very strongly welcomed. I haven't really seen that with animals, like animals being deceased. If deceased animals are encountered, these are the beloved deceased pets of the near-death experiencer. And just like the deceased beloved people they knew on Earth, boom, there they are. And again, these are joyous reunions, and there can be a great deal of interaction with that deceased beloved pet. Again, just like deceased loved ones, essentially always picture perfect health, no matter what the circumstances of death of that pet.
And how often, percentage-wise, do we see pets?
Yeah. That's probably down no more than several percent.
Okay.
But, again, out of 4,000 near-death experiences, we have scores. And I mean, hey, you name it. Yeah. Dogs, cats, birds, horses, just the whole variety of, if it's been a beloved pet that seems to have the possibility to appear in that heavenly realm as a joyous reunion and reunion with between the two of them is really a very touching, very beautiful part of near-death experiences.
So I just asked ChatGPT, how often does one human die? On average, approximately 2 people die every second globally. So if you think about 2 people dying every second globally, and these beings needing to pick up a spirit and take it to heaven or take it to wherever it's going to be going, that's a lot of spiritual energy that's surrounding the earth and picking up humans. It's not as if it's 2 dudes or 4 dudes that are just running around and getting everybody. You would think that if it's happening, if people are dying simultaneously and they're spending any amount of time with these beings, that there has to be almost a global network of spiritual energy that's collecting the soul and escorting it to heaven.
Great point, Matt. I mean, no question about that. This seems to be, it's not like this afterlife seems to be limited in terms of number of spiritual beings that are there to greet. I mean, there just seems to be, we're really, when you're in this unearthly heavenly realm, again, it's hard to conceptualize it as being non-physical, time generally non-existent. But above and beyond that, it's literally an intersection of a realm that is eternal and infinite. And so those kind of limitations or, gosh, how are you going to meet 2 people that die every second? One thing I'm confident of, not a problem in the afterlife. They've got that figured out. And it seems to be the destiny of all of us that we're going to have those joyous reunions and that introduction in a very positive way into our, you could say, our real home, that being the afterlife.
So I say heaven, but it's just for lack of a better word. I don't know what it is, but
I use the word, and that's a really good point too. And that's a very good point. We keep using the term heaven, but heaven means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So when I use the word heaven, I'm talking about, I sort of synonymously say unearthly, heavenly realms, and that's to convey the fact that this is unrelated to sort of any cultural pre-existing belief on Earth. I mean, this is very, very much defined by a huge number of near-death experiences as being that unearthly, beautiful, non-physical, timeless, eternal, infinite realm that near-death experiencers describe with such remarkable consistency.
In terms of those beings that are approaching people as they're having these near-death experiences, based on all of your research and all of your looking and all of the stories that have been told about them, what are the commonalities that you see between all of them? Like and kind of like, what do you think they really are?
Yeah, That's interesting. There is some commonalities now that you bring that up. The commonalities is that they are almost always loving presences. In other words, people feel sort of loved, compassionate. They don't feel judged. There's essentially never in near-death experiences a sense of external judgment, and that's true from these beings there. And that's even when the beings are present when they're in these life reviews or they're seeing part of their, or even all of their prior life. So the beings tend to be there, if you will, for the near-death experiencer to help them feel loved, to help them feel sort of engaged in their experience here. So, and there can be communication. There can be often the near-death experiencer may ask questions, may want to know, ask questions, even some personal questions about their life, or even some of the deeper, more fundamental questions. And we do see that periodically these beings seem to impart some understanding, some addressing of the questions that they have there. So they seem to have different roles for different near-death experiencers, but those are some of the commonalities that we see. And they tend to be described often as very beautiful beings. In other words, we're back to that old beauty beyond anything they knew on earth. And there they are in that presence again, a very positive, reassuring presence for the near-death experiencer who's just starting out in an experience that they never had in their earthly life.
So they have faces, they have arms, they have legs, they have body, real like beautiful body, or beautiful like balls of light, or like what?
Literally everything you just said there, they have been described as.
Okay.
So they can be anything and everything. They can be sort of amorphous, unformed, if you will, and just light, and yet have that loving presence. Or they can look basically like humans do, and yet they often are described as, they may be translucent, they may be have a radiant light about them that is something that it would simply they're not familiar with on earth. But generally that sense, while in the presence of these spiritual beings, of peace, of love, is one of the most common descriptors, and along with this very positive communication.
I wonder if they're taking specific forms in order to make the specific individual that they're picking up calm and comfortable. Do they ever say, do you want, I guess they would already know if the person wants them to be in a specific form, or to take a form of, say, Jesus, or a female, or a male, or a, whatever it might be that might make them feel comfortable. And does anything on that?
Okay. Another great question, Matt. That is absolutely true. We have a series of people where there may be an amorphous, unformed being, light presence, and they may at times literally ask them, in what form would you like for me to appear? And so it's the near-death experiencer that chooses what form they would like for them to be in. So again, that helps drive home the point that this is an unearthly, non-physical realm, and it's not like their appearance is fixed. And that's an important point. I think in this unearthly, non-physical realm, I think there's probably an infinite number of possibilities of how they could appear, and it's driven home by the point of actually asking the near-death experiencer, what form would you like for me to take? And again, also driving home the point that these are very loving interactions designed, if you will, for the peace and acceptance and literally a loving outreach from the other side to the person having a near-death experience.
So give an example of some of the downloaded information or transfer of information from a being to an NDE, a near-death experiencer. Like, what is it that, so they're giving them information that they need to know, I guess. What are some examples of the types of things that the person is learning from these beings?
Sure. When they're interacting with spiritual beings, there may be some questions. They may say, often they may start out very basic. Am I dead? And the response may be, well, you are here. They may ask, is this the afterlife? And then the response again is yes. So the near-death experiencer, especially early on, may sort of ask those core questions about, what's going on here? Why am I here? Is this here? And then they may, sometimes they'll ask to see a deceased loved one. Sometimes they may be asked to see God. Mm-hmm. So these are all things that they may interact with, and that the beings may, if you will, be an intermediary in conveying that knowledge or understanding and that sense of love and that sense of basically peace to the near-death experiencer.
Do they ever give them information that is useful for them to take back to their lives?
You know, when I started my research, I was absolutely hoping I could find that. And over again, when people would get information, it's not something that they could, if it was critical information, sort of the information unknown on Earth that could be of relevance to Earth, they can't really bring it back. And this brings back another thing that many near-death experiencers describe when they're interacting with spiritual beings or just simply in that heavenly realm. It's not at all unusual that they encounter what we call universal knowledge. They describe it as being aware of how everything works. I mean, art, science, literature, understanding, and far beyond anything that they could have understood on Earth. And so they all are aware, and I'm kind of surprised when they keep saying, wow, it was so simple. Well, it's not simple to us because we don't understand that. But especially when I started my research, I was hoping they'd bring back some nugget of wisdom that could directly impact in terms of, technology or, gosh, I'm a doctor, help us take care of cancer patients. But over and over, times vast numbers, they would come back and not be able to retain that knowledge. And finally, one near-death experiencer educated me and said that they couldn't retain that knowledge, that universal knowledge they had in the afterlife, because it's like trying to fit an ocean of knowledge in that teacup of the human brain. It just simply isn't anything that we can retain.
Okay, so interacting with these beings, and then let's skip forward a little bit to they go to this heavenly realm, or they go through the tunnel, or they go wherever it is to take them to now. Well, I guess first, does quote unquote God appear after they travel? Does God ever appear prior to them traveling to this heavenly realm?
Yeah. An awareness or actual encounter with God is fairly rare when they're having that out-of-body experience and observing ongoing earthly events. So virtually all the time, and this is about 15% of near-death experiencers, an actual description of an encounter or awareness of God is in these heavenly realms. Now, I want to emphasize right off the bat that God is the most common word near-death experiencers use, but it's a word of convenience. Many near-death experiencers say that being, that what we call God, that's an earthly word. And what I encountered is far beyond earthly language. Earthly language is limiting and is really difficult to use in describing that unlimited, eternal, infinite being. And yet we have to have some descriptor, and so that's the most common word. But over and over, people say, this is far beyond any conceptualization or knowing of God on earth, this overwhelming being in the near-death experience of overwhelming love, knowledge, creative force, something far beyond anything we could even conceptualize on earth.
Okay, so 15% of people report an encounter with this eternal being, this eternal unlimited being. And so what are some of the, how do they describe what they're seeing?
Yeah, appearance, highly variable. Again, sort of like other spiritual beings, it can be probably the number one descriptor is light. Again, a beautiful, unearthly, beyond any prior earthly awareness light. The light would have a personality, a powerful sense of love. Probably the number two descriptor is that sense of overwhelming love. People will say that this being, this God, loves them for who they are, everything that they are, and all that they are and ever could be. And that's a profoundly deep love, again, far beyond anything that is even conceivable here on earth. And so they also can describe God as being overwhelmingly knowledgeable. They're aware that, we talked about universal knowledge. Well, that seems to be part of this overwhelmingly loving being, this being of God. Essentially, never do I hear, in fact, never that I can recall, does God seem to be judgmental? I mean, they're simply overwhelmingly accepting.
Just acceptance, pure acceptance.
Oh, pure acceptance and pure love beyond anything they ever knew on earth, which is both surprising and profoundly reassuring to near-death experiencers that have had this earthly belief that they might be negatively judged or be in trouble. We're just not seeing that anywhere, which, by the way, is, again, yet another line of evidence for near-death experiences being different from what pre-existing earthly beliefs would have led them to expect in an experience like this. But God may be present when they have that life review, where they see part or all of their prior life. There can be some dialogue with God, some interactions, and they become aware of God's, they've been described as a creator, being described as that overwhelmingly loving being. And when there's other spiritual beings around, I mean, we talk about the other non-God spiritual beings being loving and knowledgeable, but essentially every time in a near-death experience, when they encounter God, they know this is just orders of magnitude beyond the other spiritual beings they encountered. I mean, this is not a separate spiritual being there. This is one that is extraordinarily more in every positive way possible during the near-death experience.
Wow. Wow, that's crazy. So 15% encounter this being. I wonder if it's because they've made it that far in the near-death experience. Like if you've only risen above your body and come back, or you've risen above your body and made contact with these other beings that are holding your hand, or you've just started to go through the tunnel or seen the tunnel and come back, you're obviously not going to experience God. Does it seem to be a case of these people have made it extraordinarily far, that they've been dead clinically for a longer period of time? Like, what's the correlation there?
Yes. First of all, people that are closer to death tend to be more likely to have near-death experiences and deep near-death experiences, interestingly enough, which is, again, if physical brain function were the cause of near-death experiences, it would go in the opposite way. So the closer you are to death, more likely to have a near-death experience. Encountering God is typically in the more detailed near-death experiences. As you've said, you have that out-of-body experience, consciousness over your body. You may start to have those feelings of peace, and you feel like whatever physical problems were going on in the body, you're not feeling anymore. Yeah, that's a near-death experience, a brief near-death experience, but that's not evolved enough that you're going to experience God. So these are generally the more detailed ones. They may go through that tunnel. They may suddenly find themselves in that heavenly realm. And that's where they're far more likely to be aware of. And when I say be aware, they may know that there's a God. They may sense God. They may sense that there's that presence, but not actually have that direct awareness in the sense of sensory awareness analogous to what we know on Earth. So there's either going to be that awareness, or for the others, that very direct interaction awareness in the sense of analogous to Earth vision, very much that strong sense of love, of acceptance, of peace. Those are all parts of the spectrum of encountering God in a near-death experience.
And so this God can also take whatever form, I guess. But I would assume God already knows what form the individual wants him to take. Does God take multiple forms?
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, in this not surprisingly, for you're talking about an infinite and eternal God, this is a God of infinite and eternal possibilities. So with that understanding, not surprisingly, God can appear in any form that, I guess, God wants. I mean, God is obviously a ultra-conscious being. Essentially, never do you have near-death experiencers being asked by God, what form do you want me to appear? That seems to be a decision by God. And again, you over and over, you get the sense that God is trying to interact lovingly with. I mean, God is as far as a being, love is one of the most common descriptors of it. A love beyond earth, overwhelming, beyond anything imaginable on earth. So not surprisingly, I think God is God is in a form that would be most loving for that particular near-death experience, or at that point in the near-death experiencer's journey in their experience they're having. So it seems to be just part of that, if you will, validation of just how accepted, how loved they are, and literally the reality of God, which near-death experiencers, when they recover from that close brush with death, they're far more likely as a group to believe in God than if people that didn't have a near-death experience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so it's regardless of the type of a life that the individual has lived. So I'm sure out of the 4,000 cases, you've seen people who have probably murdered people, who have probably committed some really atrocious acts of violence and crime. There's regardless of what the person has done in their mortal life, they're greeted with a complete sense of acceptance, a complete sense of non-judgment, and just overwhelming love.
Well, again, one thing you can say about near-death experiences, you really can't ever say always or never, because there's always going to be some exceptions. So yeah, we have had some people that have been interacted with God and have had some very asocial lives, or made some very bad earthly decisions. And in these relatively rare near-death experiences, God may be described as or where God is angry, God is unhappy with how they've lived their life. But note, that's very different from God judging them, from God forming a judgment about them as a soul in the near-death experience, that you are in trouble, you're jeopardized. But there are times where God seems to be literally angry. God has emotions in near-death experiences. So, love, but love far beyond the emotion of love, that sort of acceptance and everything. And interestingly, if you go up to and people often will describe they feel that mystical unity or connection with God or with other aspects of the near-death experience. And that's tough for people to wrap their head around a little bit until you do what I did, go to the dictionary and read the definition of love. And one of the first things that comes out is it's a connection. Well, this is a connection orders of magnitude more in the near-death experience than was ever conceivable here. So they do feel that connection, and they actually more often use the stronger word unity, that they feel a part of connected or one, part of a manifestation of that overwhelming love beyond anything we could have known on earth. And that includes God.
Does it more to have to do with the individual's how they feel about the life that they've lived, or is there a strong correlation between the actions that the person has taken in their life and the anger or the negative reaction of God?
Yeah. I would be reluctant to say it's a negative reaction of God, because God overwhelmingly is described as pure love.
Yeah.
I think God, in displaying the emotion of anger, is helping the person having the near-death experience realize just how antisocial, how even self-destructive their behavior has been. I think ultimately that this is a conveyance of God in that particular very loving way to help the near-death experiencer live the rest of their life
right
in a way that they're moving forward from those things and they know this. I mean, these are self-destructive, antisocial, sometimes horribly behaviors. And this is just, it's like maybe for some near-death experiencers, they need, if you will, a spiritual kick in the pants.
Yeah, sure.
And so as a result of that, this would be part of an overwhelmingly intelligent, overwhelmingly loving God to help them to understand that there are these issues that they need to deal with for the rest of their life.
Right.
And help give them the best direction down the path to turn their life around.
Right.
And it
right.
works.
Yeah.
You can imagine if you've encountered, and again, to emphasize, this isn't a matter of where they're feeling judged or where they feel that they're in some kind of eternal jeopardy. You essentially never see that. Well, you never do. I don't with near-death experiencers encountering God. The focus is always going to be that which literally defines God, and that being of love.
He's changing the course of the rest of their life because they're coming back to the planet Earth, and they're going to live their life a different way based on their interaction with God.
And interestingly, it's not because God tells them, you shall change your life. You need to do this behavior differently. This is simply a matter of God, as you would expect from an eternally infinite loving being, simply having an emotion about what the near-death experiencer recognizes as antisocial behavior. And so this just helps get that spiritual kick in the pants. It helps them to understand that, to perhaps confront their own behaviors in a way that they wouldn't have been able to do before, and allows them the opportunity to move forward with the rest of their earthly life, being far more loving than they possibly could have ever been without that encounter.
So if there's 15% of people that actually get this approximately, this experience with God out of 4,000, then you're talking about 600 people potentially. And then you're talking about, out of those people, what percentage have had out of the 600, what percentage have had like that? What percentage have seen that anger from God? Extremely
small percentage.
Okay.
And again, I want to emphasize that while no two near-death experiences are the same, and you can almost never say always or never happens in a near-death experience. I emphasize it's very, very unusual. It's rare that God displays that emotion of anger, but you do get the sense that God, being that infinitely encompassing thing, feels, loves, is aware. I think God hurts when we hurt. I think God hurts when near-death experiencers are in pain. It's really literally God has got that connection so much to us that I think God rejoices when we rejoice. Suffers when we suffer. You really get that sense in near-death experiences that God is really that much a part of us and really interested in, aware of, and then that's just simply a manifestation of love. God in near-death experiences is not that separate person up on a cloud with a beard, casting down judgments or thoughts. I mean, God is literally a part of, enveloped with the near-death experiencer and literally compassionate, beyond anything we could possibly know on earth. I mean, love, again, is an earthly word. We're talking about love that is beyond any kind of earthly life experience of any of us, any of us watching this talk here. I mean, this is how deeply God cares about us. And I think and over and over, near-death experiencers bring back that awareness. I mean, that God really loves us, but beyond anything we could possibly know or even understand. And that's a really incredibly, I mean, we were talking about all of us going to an afterlife, and there's God with that profound sense of love or care about each and every one of us. Wow, that's one of the most positive, powerful messages of near-death experience that I have.
It's almost as if he's connected to us, as if we're a part of the same life that he is, if he's feeling our emotions and we're feeling his anger and or his love or whatever it is that we're. I know that's such a small component of it, but how do people describe that? Like, what actually is he? I mean, and he is even the wrong word, right? But to be unlimited and limitless and eternal and all of those words, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's so tough because when you're talking about the infinite, this is part of the whole mystery of near-death experiences in general. I mean, this is an intersection with the infinite, the eternal, and here we are, very limited beings in a physical earthly life, and you really can't expect any of us to understand or grasp deeply that concept of being infinite, of being eternal, of being, we use words that are descriptors that we're familiar with, and yet it's something beyond English language. I mean, how do you really grasp that? So I think while we can't know the details or in depth the specifics about God or what the afterlife's all about, I think we can understand very importantly some qualitative understandings that we see so literally in thousands of near-death experiences. I think the important take-home message is we are, each and every one of us, loved beyond anything that we could possibly know. Our earthly life is obviously profoundly meaningful and significant. There is an afterlife, a very wonderful afterlife that is the destiny for all of us, and, thank goodness, there is that overwhelming, powerful, loving God that is in the afterlife, which we'll all be a part of when we ultimately end our earthly life.
Gosh, I mean, it could go so many different directions at this point.
Yep,
I mean,
an infinite number of directions.
Yeah, really and truly. I mean,
and it's tough, too, because it's just, here we are trying to. It's very, and I've struggled with this. I mean, it has been difficult for me in the 25 years I've been studying with near-death experiences. So aware of those ongoing, varied, detailed, amazing descriptions of it. What's eternal, what's infinite, and it's. I'm one that likes to know about this. And yet, at the end of the day, after having thought about this for literally for decades now, I have to accept that there's things we can't know on earth. There's things that we can't understand because of our physical earthly limitation. But what I can understand is that there is that infinite. There is that eternal, and perhaps that's the most important message, and that we all are going to be a part of that at some point in time when we end our earthly life. And gosh, I would suggest, Matt, that's among the most powerfully positive message for all of humanity that's even conceivable.
Any mention of hell or anything? Has anyone seen anything that might indicate that hell is a real thing, a real place? Mm-hmm.
Sure. First of all, it's rare in near-death experience. There's only going to be about 1% or 2% of near-death experiences that describe that. So I've been interested in that topic, and here's my understanding so far, which I admit is a work in progress. But of the several dozen near-death experiences I've looked at, first of all, about half of the time there's an awareness of hell. They seem to be in these heavenly realms, often moving rapidly with other spiritual beings, and they're aware of hell as a segregated area in heaven. I mean, it's apart from earth, obviously, but it seems to be in an environment where the beings that, and they can sense often, or will describe, sense that there's evil there, there's evil beings there, but they seem to be in a realm that is separate from the rest of the heavenly realms where all the other spiritual beings are. So when someone says in a near-death experience there can't possibly be hell in that heavenly realm, they're correct, because it's a very segregated, separate realm that is apart from heaven, and yet it's real. So for the other half of people that have described this, they're actually impacted by that. They are aware or encounter these unearthly or heavenly realms, and they can be truly, as you can imagine, demonic, frightening, sights, sounds, feelings. And first of all, when they're in that realm, a number of near-death experiencers call out to God, to Jesus, to just in general, please remove me from this realm. And the substantial majority will ultimately be removed from that realm. And they'll understand that, perhaps for whatever reason, for rest of their earthly life, or maybe it's that spiritual kick in the pants, they needed to be aware of that. And that seems to be it. The other concept that I've had as I do this is when you see these evil demonic beings in that segregated, walled off, almost you conceptualize, area of hell, it's not like they were thrust there involuntarily, like they were sentenced to have an eternal existence there. It seems to be...
You just dip them in and...
dip them right in. No, actually there's a silver lining to that very ugliest part of what souls can be, and that is it seems to validate free will. It seems to be a choice not only here on earth, but in the afterlife. It seems that these demonic beings made almost certainly not one, but a whole series of very bad choices to be evil, to try to be dark souls, to be inappropriately, unloving, literally in a realm which is ruled by love. And so, interestingly, in these hellish realms where you have these demonic beings, paradoxically, that is to them their heaven, because they're around beings like them. They've made that choice. They want to be there because those are the choices, the free will choices they made, showing that free will exists in the afterlife, even to the point that they are allowed to make horrible, horrible choices where they all end up there. There's their heaven because they're in that realm of beings like them. They share their values. That's where they've chosen to be, and that seems to be the best way I understand hell in near-death experiences.
It's crazy. So they still, so free will exists, and they're almost putting themselves within the crowd that they feel the most comfortable with.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's some of the strongest evidence for the reality of free will in the afterlife that you can come up with. I mean, what a profoundly incredible, loving God to allow people to have free will such that they could even make what apparently are a whole series of moving closer and closer to the demonic, closer and closer to that vile and evil existence. And God just, probably with, as we said, incredible sadness, allows that soul to choose through free will what it wants to do, and then ultimately ends up being by choice in that hellish realm. That is and again, I would emphasize this is a work in progress.
Yeah,
that's my best understanding as to how hell could exist in a realm of overwhelming, essentially universal love, peace, and a realm of God. So that's my best understanding that I have at this point about what the big picture is there.
Noted. Yeah, thank you for that point of clarity. And it's a smaller sample size that you're dealing with that.
Extremely small, and it's still, and I would say that's still a work in progress. I'll continue to study it, and we've, if we stay tuned for future podcasts. If I have any new insights, we'll be sharing that.
Love it. So die before you die, and you won't die when you die. That's death of the ego, and you won't end up there. So just out of any sense for what the relative size of the quote unquote hell versus the size of the heavenly realm? Is it a 1 to 10 ratio? Is it I wonder how many if there's any sense of okay, I'm traveling to this heavenly this unearthly heavenly place, and I see this. Is it a little place called hell? Is it equal to the size of heaven? I want to understand how many people are going. I want to know what my chances are, basically.
Okay, well, I have great news. If you don't, if you choose to be overwhelmingly loving and everything. By the way, in the unearthly heavenly realms, people will often say they're known for who they are, everything they are, and people are all aware of that. So you can see, if you have evil, demonic intent, you can see how awkward that would be to be in a realm of overwhelmingly love and known that other beings would be aware of you. You can just imagine how awkward that would be and how they could make those bad choices to end up in hellish realm. But to get directly to your question, when people describe that segregated hellish realm, it seems to be, thank goodness, an extremely small relative to infinite. I mean, you could imagine how, personally, I can't imagine how you could be in a realm with an overwhelming peace, love, beauty, and embraced with and a part of that overwhelming love and that God, and then make these just literally crazy, insane, evil choices to go with. I can't understand that. And yet free will exists, and apparently some souls do. So my best impression is it is an overwhelmingly, exceedingly small realm of hell. And I would further say that, again, believing and understanding that free will exists as part of a manifestation of that infinite and eternal love, which I believe is all of our destinies. I firmly believe that these people that are in hell, if they were to give up their evil ways, if they were to acknowledge that they want to return to the light, if you will, they're going to be known, and it'll be aware for the rest of their eternal existence about that incredibly series of bad decisions they make. But I think that's their choice, because I think that's the realm of love. That's a realm of free will.
And forgiveness has to be a part
absolutely,
of. It's a part of acceptance.
Absolutely, it would be forgiveness. So I think there's always that ability for us to choose, to choose and choose what I think is the overwhelmingly obvious thing to go to the light, to go to the love, to go to that eternal beauty.
So double clicking on that, then, if there is an individual that during their earthly life was a individual who could be described as evil, or could be described as or is just a person who maybe did a lot of unconscious things or quote unquote bad things to people. Do people who are having a near-death experience, do they ever see that person, that quote unquote bad person, as one of the beings that's coming to take them to heaven? Do people ever describe, if you have a terrible relationship with your mother and you view your mother as a narcissistic, bitch, are you ever greeted by your mother but have her be healed or converted or whatever it might be?
Oh, absolutely. Huh. We have people that have had strained relationships, that have had some very, what we consider in earthly terms to be very negative during their earthly life. When they appear as a deceased being in a near-death experience, they're essentially always mammothly loving and understanding. And just to sort of clarify this a little bit, here on Earth, when we form these negative opinions about, narcissistic, I like the term,
it's a judgment. It's not acceptance.
I think when you have that eternal knowing in a near-death experience, it's not a matter of seeing them at the end point where they're narcissistic, difficult, antisocial being. When you have that eternal, infinite knowledge about that person, it's like, oh, wait a minute. You were born as a child. You had a horrific upbringing. You had all the pressures in your earthly life. You had narcissistic, antisocial parents. That was all you could learn. And so I think with complete knowledge, it becomes a lot easier to understand how they developed to be antisocial in their earthly life. And there's far more compassion, awareness, understanding. There, but for the grace of God, go I kind of thing. And I think it helps for people to not judge them based on the end result of this horrific upbringing and experiences of their earthly life, but for them to say that was how that all happened. And so I think that's part of why in the afterlife there's that overwhelming loving forgiveness, acceptance, because we're known for who we are, everything we are, and all those very sad, difficult experiences in life that may have impacted us in different ways because of our human frailties, to go down the direction of being difficult, unloving people here in our earthly life. But in the afterlife, we all understand that. Yeah, I think it's fairly easy to understand, who we really are, our eternal soul self, and we're embraced and a part of that afterlife in a very loving way.
Love that. Yeah, beautiful. So is there, onto maybe the religious kind of, maybe not religion specifically, but if you look at people from the West, if you look at Christians, are they seeing a God that is Jesus and Yahweh, and are people from India seeing Shiva, and are Muslims seeing Muhammad? Is there correlation there, or is the God that people are seeing more just omni whatever?
Okay. Yeah, two separate questions there. As far as God, that seems to be cross-cultural. In other words, God is, again, that's a human word, but God, as far as being overwhelmingly loving, compassionate, accepting, the creating force, etc., that seems to be cross-cultural. God is God, whatever our prior belief system, wherever on earth we were when we had our near-death experience, that seems to be the end point of understanding God. As far as religious beings, it's a common perception that Christians will see Jesus and people in other non-Christian faiths will see religious beings in their own particular religion. First of all, Christians do see Jesus. We're talking about maybe 5 to 7% of near-death experiences see that. When Jesus is encountered, it's rare that the near-death experiencer is unsure of who it is, has to ask. They instantly seems to be that awareness, as with other deceased loved ones or being. Jesus in near-death experiences is very vividly aware of the near-death experiencer of being a very extraordinary being. Sure, you have all these other spiritual beings where they feel that sense of love and peace, but often Jesus is described as being far more than any of that. So Jesus in near-death experiences, an absolute exceptional being. And as with God in near-death experiences, Jesus is that overwhelmingly loving, accepting. Most common descriptor of Jesus is just basically that overwhelming, loving presence, accepting presence. People are often surprised, startled even, that they're not judged or that they have a dialogue about what they've done wrong in their earthly life. They're just simply there, and Jesus is very profoundly loving. Now, even though I've studied non-Western near-death experiences and actually have the largest research study on that has been reported in the world, religious beings are far less commonly reported in non-Western near-death experiences. And I actually did a scholarly study of Muslim near-death experiences in Iran with a Iranian near-death experience researcher, and I asked him, what's up with this? Why are people not describing Muhammad as often as they would Jesus? And his response was very interesting. He said, in the culture of Islam, it would be very much frowned upon if you brought up that you encountered Muhammad. That would be culturally very considered. You wouldn't describe that. So number one, they probably don't encounter religious beings, particularly per the assessment of this Iranian near-death experience researcher I've worked with. So they probably aren't encountering Muhammad as much, and probably secondly, even if they do, I think they'd be a lot more reluctant to share that because of cultural concerns about that type of encounter. So that, and yet people do describe. We've had some imams describe by some experiences are just far less likely. I think we're back to, as we mentioned earlier, you've got these beings that can, what form do you want me to take, and what would be the most loving way to have a creative near-death experience. And I think that would explain why you see Christians with that belief or that background, and of course they're going to continue in that earthly life in a Western Christian environment predominantly. It makes sense that they would see Jesus, and you don't want to have somebody impeded in the rest of their earthly life by encountering beings that would be to the detriment of their living the rest of their earthly life, especially if they have to share it with other people. So again, I think it's just part of that loving co-creation of near-death experiences. It seems to be a consistent theme.
So I wonder if the beings are able to take whatever shape that they want to take or form that they want to take. And of course, God can take whatever form he wants to take. And sometimes you've got beings asking people what form they want them to take. And And it's only 7% of people, 5 to 7% of people that report seeing Jesus, regardless of whether or not they're. I wonder. There doesn't seem to be much correlation there, I guess, with religion and near-death experiences.
Yeah, that's a key point. And that's part of that scholarly book chapter I co-authored, as I alluded to earlier. We were surprised when we reviewed prior near-death experience research that there was shockingly little correlation between prior cultural religious beliefs and what the content was, and that includes encountering religious beings. I mean, heck, we have atheists, and we ask specifically in our modern survey what their religious belief or lack of religious belief was at the time of their near-death experience. So we have a pretty good over 20 people that were atheist at the time of their near-death experience, and some of them describe encountering God. Obviously, they generally don't remain atheists after they have that particular experience, but they can encounter God, they can encounter Jesus. So once again, surprisingly, it doesn't seem to be that religious belief or lack of religious belief that has a strong influence. I think it has perhaps a minor influence, but atheists can encounter God and Jesus. Christians often don't encounter God or Jesus, and it's one of the major mysteries of near-death experiences. We just don't know exactly. We can't really predict with much, if any, accuracy just exactly what the specific content of a near-death experience will be.
Yeah. You wonder if they were really atheist prior to having the experience. You wonder if they were really a closet Christian, or if they even had the near-death experience. I guess some of it has to be people just making stuff. I mean, a small percentage has to be people making stuff up, and that could easily account for a 5 to 7%. I would think.
It's an anonymous survey. Yeah. They have an array of options to pick of their religious belief or lack of religious belief at the time of the near-death experience. So I think, and it's about 5% of our near-death experiencers that self-described themselves as atheist at the time of the near-death experience. That's about proportional to the United States population of self-described atheists. So I would tend to say that's probably pretty accurate what they're conveying. I think and of course, again, they will most of the time there'll be a different religious belief. But I would say that's probably, when they self-describe themselves as atheists, that's the real thing. Yeah.
If all of these people are having these experiences with these beings and with quote unquote God, the limitless eternal being that people are encountering, and they're coming back to earth after they have this experience with God, they're becoming believers that there is a God, and it's not a belief; it's a knowing at that point. They've had this experience, and so they know. It requires no belief. How do they pick a religion? It's almost like if everyone all throughout the world and all these different religious beliefs are having the same experience, if they make it that far through the near-death experience to encounter God. Clearly there's not one true religion, right? I mean, it's how do you come back and you take on religion, you adopt religion, even if you were an atheist prior, but it's like, I'm just going to throw darts and choose one,
The near-death experiencers are not throwing darts.
Yeah.
So let me explain that. Okay. We ask in our survey about their religious belief at the time they had their near-death experience. Then we ask about their religious belief at the time they shared their near-death experience, an average of about 15 years later. And so we can, on average, I think for the majority, the religious affiliation they had, and we get into like Christian, Protestant, Jewish, so we have a fairly finely tuned subset of possible religious beliefs. So the majority of people, the religious belief they were at the time of their near-death experience is the same religious affiliation they select on the survey at the time they shared their near-death experience. So even though so many people have had these deep insights, profound spiritual understandings, changes, they seem to be able to incorporate that in a wide variety of religions. So it seems like what they've learned seems to fit into essentially except for atheism, to some extent agnosticism, they pretty much find a match, a home in their religious belief they had to the time they shared their religious belief. And so that's reassuring that what they've learned seems to be something that a wide variety of religious beliefs can encompass. So that's interesting there too. And then I think you raised another question about that was remind me again about that. That was about there was another point there.
I think he covered it. I think he covered it. Yeah.
Well, that's good. So it's now of the minority that have a change in religious affiliation, we've had sort of two different versions of the survey. The first version was over 1,000 near-death experiencers, and so we asked them in that version of the survey, before we fine-tuned the specific religious affiliation, we asked them about their religious affiliation being liberal, moderate, or conservative fundamentalists. And so with this huge number of people responding to that, they're liberal, moderate, or conservative fundamentalist at the time of their near-death experience, and then at the time they shared their near-death experience. Percentage-wise, there's a very, very slight, literally only a few percent shift in the direction of being liberal. But because it's such a vast data set, that is statistically significant. But again, the bigger message is people, if they were liberal in their religious beliefs, the significant majority retain being liberal. If they were moderate, they were moderate. If they were conservative fundamentalist, they're going to go on to be conservative fundamentalists. So that's sort of one way to look at it. And then as far as, again, our modern survey, the specific religious affiliation that they've chosen, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Hindu, that generally is, at least for the majority, is propagated over this. Now, of the minority that do change their religious affiliation, probably, if you will, a plurality of that subset will define themselves as spiritual but not religious. So there are certainly many near-death experiencers who say they can't go on with their pre-existing religious belief, and they tend to say religious just simply can't capture my understanding, my spiritual values, beliefs that I currently have. So they're more, again, a slight, and I want to emphasize it's a minority, a distinct minority will be more likely to, instead of going to any conventional named religious affiliation, it's that spiritual but not religious. We see that. But on the other hand, that's true of American society in the last 20 years anyway, I might add, is there tends to be more and more people self-describing as spiritual but not religious.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Well, let's move on from the religious component of it. I really appreciate you diving into that, though. That's super fascinating to me. Religion is one of the things that I'm interested in exploring on the channel, and I've done it a couple of times on a couple podcasts. So good stuff there. Question on the moment of death for people prior to them leaving their body. I think a fear that a lot, and because this conversation should create so much peace for people as they think about the moment of their death, and they think about when that everything is going to be okay, that they're going to be accepted, they're going to be loved, it's going to be a beautiful experience, they're going to see things in a different way that they've never seen anything before, hear sounds and music in an incredibly new and different way that can't even be described, and see things that in a completely different way. But the moment of death, do they describe pain? Do they describe agony? Do they describe, the process of the soul that they are separating from the body that they have? Are they describing themselves being in any sort of pain and agony?
Well, before their near-death experience begins, these are people that are having a close brush with death. They can be, at times they're, already unconscious. It may happen quickly. At times they may be, physically dying. Physical dying is a painful process. You can't overlook that. However, the moment that consciousness, and it's been called the soul, leaves the physical body, that moment, almost invariably in near-death experiences, they're not having any pain. They're not having that horrific fear. They may often describe like a detachment from the physical body. It's like, whoa, that's down there. That's not me. I am up here, feeling pain-free, feeling liberated. I could move, think, and get around in a way that I couldn't within the constraints of my physical body. So at the moment of death, at that moment of separation, that's essentially immediately all pain goes away. When they are aware of their consciousness leaving the body. That's kind of interesting too. It can be anywhere. It can be head, chest, or anywhere on the physical body, or just seemingly all of the physical body. So that's all variably described if they're aware of sort of that point of their consciousness leaving. It isn't confined to just one anatomic area. But I think the most important thing is, to have somebody literally dying, in that kind of misery, and they're unconscious at the time they have their experience. So for them to, have that kind of misery and then have it progress to unconscious or clinical death, boom, once that time that consciousness soul separates from the physical body, all of that's over. They feel it, they just don't feel that pain, misery, and they often will go to some length to describe that. Wow, here I was literally dying and unconscious from that life-threatening event, and boom, here I am free from all that.
Do they ever mention that they've had a choice for the time at which their consciousness leaves their body, or is it just when?
Yeah. That's a great point. No, I'm not aware of any near-death experiences where there seems to be some kind of a choice about when their consciousness will leave the physical body. Okay. It just seems to be, boom, it happens. And they don't really comment on that, except the point is it virtually never happens when they're conscious, even when they're physically miserable or in agony. If they've got to be unconscious physically, clinically, if you will, in their physical body, or clinically dead, that's when their consciousness separates from the body.
Okay. And so I've heard you mention before that it's a completely different experience than what we know to be the experience of like psychedelics or any type of a drug that you can do. But so we don't need to go into all that. I know you've talked about that at length, but what about, are you familiar with remote viewing? And so that remote viewing is essentially when your consciousness travels away from your body to go and view something or see something or go somewhere else, and it's something that Project Stargate, the United States, has experimented with this, and so as far as I can tell, it's a real thing. Are you familiar with it, and would you say that there's any kind of similarities between remote viewing and a near-death experience?
Sure. I don't have a scholarly awareness of the literature on remote viewing, so I want to emphasize that right off the bat. But, as you know, you're talking about consciousness voluntarily through intent, leaving the physical body, going to some place far distant from their body, making visual observations, and then bringing back those. And there's been a number of reports on that about how remarkably accurate that is. So I think it's one of those things I wish there was a lot more scholarly study. Here you are with a large number of reports, a large number of people bringing back something that is strongly suggestive of consciousness apart from the body, just like near-death experiences. So I would put out a plea to have that studied more. That needs to be a lot more research on that. We need to learn about that because, once again, that is just another suggestive line of evidence that we're far more than our physical bodies and physical brain.
Right. Yeah. The Monroe Institute does a lot of incredible work on there and offers classes and whatnot, and hoping to get to that one day. I'm fascinated by that as well.
That would be, I'm certainly, I wish there were two of me so I could sit here and study all that, but the analogy of consciousness apart from the body from near-death experiences, especially consciousness far from the physical body in near-death experiences, and awareness and evidential observations in near-death experience, strikingly interesting to analogize that with remote viewing.
Can you talk about a shared near-death experience? Well, first off, what is a shared near-death experience? And then can you talk about one that you haven't talked about publicly before?
Sure. A shared near-death experience are two or more people having a simultaneous life-threatening event to the point that they're unconscious or clinically dead. And boom, at that point in time, they are aware of each other. Generally, in my series, and we're up to about 20 now, they're aware of each other, they can communicate with each other, but they're each having a near-death experience. Their consciousness is apart from their physical body. They can be aware of and talk about their physical body down there, even to the point of saying, wow, we're dead. there's awareness of that because their consciousness is up here and they're interacting. So in my series, like I say, it's two people interacting. I don't have three or more interacting. In these, what would be a good example that we haven't before? There was, one example was one of the earliest shared near-death experiences I got was there was a very bad car accident, and these were two teen boys, and both of them were unconscious and literally, close to death. And there they were sort of up above their body, saw the wreck down below. They were sort of like in a tree area looking down there, and that was where they made the comment, wow, we're dead. And so there was awareness and interaction and some dialogue about, well, here we are up here, what's going on. And after they shared for a while, one of them ultimately moved on. Their consciousness left that interaction with the other person. They went on. And then it was sometime later, the other one regained consciousness in the car and went on to survive. So as a result of that, they realized they had a shared death experience. Once you recover consciousness after shared near-death experience, you are pretty much know that the other person is irreversibly, permanently dead. The reason these are important for a couple reasons. Number one, they're certainly, very significant evidence for the reality of near-death experiences. I mean, here you are able to interact and know another person's permanently, irreversibly dead, even when you were not told that in your physical earthly life. But in a very fascinating perspective, this is certainly a significant suggestive line of evidence that when we do permanent, irreversible death, that the near-death experience seems to be that initial consciousness step that we might all go through as part of near-death experience. In other words, there may be that out-of-body experience. There may be other spiritual beings around. There may be, if you will, that journey, travel through a tunnel, maybe not into some other realm. But remarkably, this seems to be suggestive that at the time we all die, that may be our initial pathway that all of us, or at least most of us, or many of us, are going to go through as described in shared near-death experiences.
But so far, we've only had one out of two people come back and be able to explain and describe what they've experienced.
Right. And I've kept my eye out for that. I would love to find, my 20 that we have. These are very rare, obviously, experiences. I have yet to describe, except maybe for one. We had one where they were in a building that collapsed, and I believe there was some awareness of several other souls. But for the rest, basically, of the 20 we have, as far as detailed interactions or dialogue, it's only been one person who is going to return to earthly life and one person that will go on to permanent, irreversible death. So that's the pattern of the 20 that I have. And maybe that's not surprising. I mean, it's kind of unusual to have two people, have a simultaneous life-threatening event. Near-death experiences are only a 10 to 20% probability, I think, per life-threatening event. So that kind of, I guess you could wonder or speculate if that is why they're so uncommon. And then especially by the time you have three or more people, fortunately, mercifully, that's not real common to have three or more people, especially in the same geographic area, have a life-threatening event.
Do you think it's only 15 to 20% because either A, they can't remember it, or B, because they were never clinically dead in the first place?
Yeah. Well, we're pretty sure clinically they were dead in the first place. I mean, unconscious here they are living their life. They're struggling with a life-threatening event, or they suddenly lose consciousness. So there's no doubt you go from, unconscious is clear. They're not aware of any bodily sensation. They're not thinking. They're not feeling anything anymore. So even retrospectively, which these studies are, you can be pretty clear that they're unconscious or clinically dead. That's, if you have your heart stop, you need some pretty serious medical intervention. So that's typically very well documented. The emergency medical team comes, you're getting CPR. They may see their CPR being given with their out-of-body experience. So we're pretty sure that that's, that they are really unconscious or clinically. It's not like they're even having fragments of memory. It's a physical brain function 0, and then they have a near-death experience, and all of a sudden it changes. And, so why do 10 to 20% of people that nearly die have a near-death experience? 80 or 90% of people don't. gosh, I wish we knew that. We're back to that scholarly book chapter we looked at. We were just dang curious about that. I mean, who wouldn't be? So here we are studying prior research, looking at demographics, looking at anything that prior researchers had, and we just simply cannot predict who would have it and who wouldn't. The only correlation that seemed to stick is of people that were closer to death, that had that cardiac arrest, that were really, literally closer to permanent irreversible death. They were a little more likely to have a near-death experience, but it was not, it was some correlation, not a high correlation. So once again, we're back to that, not fully understanding that. However, and I've puzzled on that. I did, I guess my working hypothesis came directly from a near-death experiencer themselves. This near-death experiencer was having an overwhelmingly, as they usually are, blissful, positive experience in this heavenly realm, and they encountered God. And they were, as we've said, they can interact with God. And this near-death experiencer asked God directly, why me? Why was I chosen to have this remarkable experience? And God replied to this near-death experiencer, and I'll try to do this exactly verbatim, everyone is special. Love falls on everyone equally. This is what you needed to live your earthly life. So as best I can tell, that's my working hypothesis, is that there seems to be some decision, some loving decision made from outside of our physical, earthly, individual consciousness as to why some people have near-death experiences and some don't. It seems to be especially critical for them in some way that we don't fully understand, that it was especially important for them for living the rest of their earthly life. Lessons they needed to see, understandings they needed to have.
Yeah, that's crazy. So that's one option, that and probably the most likely option as to why 15-20% of people have NDEs and 80-85% of people don't, I guess. Potentially one other option could be they don't remember it, I guess, and potentially
Sure.
Even a third option would be that 80% of people on the planet are just NPCs.
Well, every shred of evidence we have from near-death experiences, NPC means a non-player character, probably in computer games where you're not really a part of that. But every shred of the good news is, for everybody concerned about that, every shred of evidence is that every person here on Earth has a soul, has that destiny of being eternal. Yeah. So. Yeah. That's the good news on that. We are not, there's no shred of evidence out of thousands of near-death experiences that some of us are destined for a heavenly or blissful existence afterwards, and some of us aren't. So that's the good news about that. But circling back to another point you made, another hypothesis, what if they just don't forget? And that's fascinating. That is absolutely could be true. What if we can induce that awareness, that understanding? Is there some mechanism that we can help people to understand near-death experiences that they forgot or were not allowed to remember? And that's part of the mystery of near-death experiences. As part of what I would love it if we could find something like that. So again, research marches on. Stay tuned, and that is certainly a hypothesis.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So in terms of suicide versus an accidental death or dying at an old age, I feel like people who are listening now could be like, wow, the afterlife sounds incredible, and the life that I have right now does not sound so great. I'm just going to end my life right now. What would you say to that?
Matt, that's a really important point, and there's been a lot of good research on people that attempted suicide and had a near-death experience. And remarkably, for virtually everybody that attempted suicide and had a near-death experience, during their experience, they come away with the profound, deep understanding that their suicide was a mistake, that however difficult their earthly existence was, that it's important, it's meaningful, it's significant. I mean, their earthly life is, in reality, the tiniest slice of their eternal existence. And the near-death experiencers that got that way by having a suicide attempt, when they recover, they almost never attempt suicide again, which is unlike people that attempt suicide and don't have a near-death experience. Tragically, they're much more likely to attempt suicide again and again. So that's, again, a profound, life-saving message from near-death experiences, that our earthly life really is that important. Everybody has a difficult life, and some people have profoundly difficult lives. But that's another key spiritual message from near-death experiences, that suicide is never an answer, and that we're all here for a reason and a purpose, however difficult, complex our life may be.
And how do they get that message? What are one or two examples of people who have attempted suicide and have realized that through what download of information or through what experience did they realize that the suicide was a mistake?
They can hear that message either from other spiritual beings they can become aware of through dialogue, that understanding, again, not judgment typically. Interestingly, they're not judged for that suicide. They just become aware of the importance, the profound importance of love, that there really is an afterlife, that they're deeply loved. I mean, some people commit suicide because they're not aware of just how loved they are. And they can, if you have a life review, you can realize that's where you see part or all of your prior life. They realize that their earthly life really is far more meaningful and significant, and they had the ability to reach out lovingly to people in their life and create positive impacts in other people's lives that they just didn't have an insight with. So from several different ways, they can come back with that deep understanding that their suicide, while it was, again, they're not judged, but it was a big mistake, and they act on that by generally not attempting suicide again and going forward with their life with that reassurance how loved they are and that their destiny is an afterlife.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the kids in my oldest son, who's a senior in high school's class, he grew up with them and went to school with them, just committed suicide about 2 weeks ago. And the impact that suicide has on the people around you is it's nothing that you could ever imagine as you're going through it. The sadness and sorrow that you bring to other life is just it's incredible, and it lasts for a lifetime in the form of stored trauma for all the people that knew the individual that took their own life. And so you can imagine if unity and oneness and compassion and forgiveness and love and acceptance were ultimately the true emotions that make us who we are, our spiritual emotions, our present moment emotions, that of course, spreading that negativity, spreading that trauma, spreading that, regret and sorrow and sadness and depression and all of those things would be obviously frowned upon.
Oh, absolutely. It's so sad that you had that in your son, especially that very first person experience with that, but entirely consistent with the wisdom of near-death experiences. Take hope. Life's important, and it's a journey to be lived, no matter how difficult. And that's yet another critical message, important message from near-death experiences.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. When you mentioned our eternal existence, of the eternal existence of the soul that we are, it implies reincarnation, I guess, in a way. After all of your studies and looking into these topics, what are your thoughts on reincarnation?
Yeah, well, it's Matt, it's true confession time. Okay. I went into my study of near-death experience thinking that reincarnation was ridiculous. No way, no how. I mean, that was somewhat the cultural belief I was raised with. Family, it was considered to be impossible. So that was my foundation when I started my near-death experience research. And oh my gosh, have I seen hundreds and hundreds of near-death experiences very directly talking about, often occurring during their life review. They may see their prior earthly life, but then boom, all of a sudden they're aware during their near-death experience very vividly of prior earthly lives, and often bringing back some very detailed awareness of that. And it's they may have been a male in the prior life, female. Generally, when these prior lives are, they become aware of that during a near-death experience, they're just very mundane, everyday types of life, decades or even centuries ago, previously. So essentially never do we have anybody that has a reincarnation prior life remembrance where they were Cleopatra or anything like that. I wouldn't believe that either. But these are just very much salt of the earth, mundane existences. So that's really completely changed my mind, as a physician and as a near-death experience researcher. I make my opinions based on evidence and reasoning, and there's a mountain of evidence for the reality of near-death, for reincarnation. And I guess part of that, I had to conceptualize that by understanding that if you believe we live in a universe of infinite possibilities, if you really understand and accept that, well, reincarnation is just, one of those infinite possibilities. So it certainly does, certainly possible by that concept, and certainly a reality based on a mountain of evidence. Just real quick example, people would wonder, wow, what's that all like? We had a guy who had a near-death experience, saw there's prior earthly life, and boom, he remembered his reincarnated life back when he was living in a medieval walled-in city. And if you think these walled-in medieval cities were like Disney with towering castles and knights in white armor, no, this was the reality, what he was aware of. Walled-in cities were they were necessary to keep out marauding armors and bandits. So within those walled cities, you were confined. They were muddy, gross. It was disease. There were sick people roaming, and it was a very ugly, brutal life. And he described that vividly during his reincarnation remembrance from that prior life. And so, it kind of drives home the very poignant reality of how difficult prior lives were. So, and that's just one example out of, like I say, literally over hundreds of examples of people remembering either in detail or in more detail prior life remembrances. Led me to accept reincarnation based on literally a mountain of evidence.
So approximately 4,000 of these testimonies in total, and 100 or 200, a couple of hundred of them have actually recalled prior lives at some point throughout the experience.
Right. It'd be hard for me to nail that down, because in our most recent version of the survey, we ask a question that's sort of tangentially related to reincarnation, and we have just shooting responses to our most recent survey. We have way over 100 people that are aware of or talk openly about awareness of reincarnation, how they now believe in that. So it's hundreds. It's more than just 100 or 200, based on my recollection of the evidence. Yeah, it's not rare at all for near-death experiences to have an awareness or new belief in, based on their experience in the near-death experience, that reincarnation is real.
And these are not people who went into the near-death experience believing in reincarnation.
Oh, gosh, no. These, only about 20% of Americans believe in reincarnation at this time. So, to have that, these people would be, presumably they're like the rest of the American population. So, yeah, the significant majority of these people either didn't have an opinion or disbelieved reincarnation, and boom, there it is by, personal experience. Heck, that's the greatest teacher. And so these people come to believe that just by understanding from personal belief. Boom.
Well, they come to know it as opposed to believe it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is so different. You can hear people talk about reincarnation, but to actually know it, to experience, to know that they had prior lives, that is a much deeper understanding than just an awareness. That is a deep, profound knowing.
Right. Mm-hmm. And is that something that the knowledge of the prior lives, is that, again, one of those things that comes later in the near-death experience? It doesn't come the moment you leave your body, right? Is that something that this God entity gives you, or where does that I heard you say it comes in the life review, of course, but is it 100% of the time in the life review, or?
Yeah, my recollection is the great majority of the time it's a life review. Okay. It starts out, and it doesn't even have to start out with prior earthly life experiences. They may, although that's the most common pattern. Again, we're back to that. You can almost never say always or never in near-death experiences, but the great majority, it is indeed during that life review where they see part or all of their prior earthly life, and then, as that plays out, then they become aware of one or even multiple prior earthly life existences, and that's generally the far more likely time. Although my recollection is they can become aware of prior lives much less commonly during the near-death experience, but it's possible.
Okay. So typically it happens in a life review with the entity that we would refer to as God.
Actually, the majority of the time, God's not present.
Okay.
When they have a life review, in general, there's either no entity around, or there may just be one or several. They're more likely to just be spiritual entities. Actually, Jesus has been described as being around in a life review, not uncommonly. So it's generally those are the either no entities or one or several around there. And interestingly, once again, they're aware of their prior earthly life. Again, there's that sense of non-judgment. There's that sense very vividly of being a completely different person. And interestingly, though, even though they may be a different gender, they're in a different country, different environment and belief that they had at that point in time, they typically describe themselves as being themselves. In other words, they say, I was in a different life, but it was me. I am who I am. I sort of had that core personality that I have, and yet there I was projecting that self in a different era and a different life.
Okay, so reincarnation then, are all of these prior lives, are all of them on Earth that people describe?
Very uncommonly to rarely, people are aware of a prior existence not of this earth. And that's just dang fascinating to me, as you can imagine. But they are aware of their existence or conscious existence in an unearthly realm. And again, these are very, very uncommon. I wish I had a lot more of these experiences to study, but they're very clear that this was alien in all the trimmings. I mean, this was different, very different from Earth in terms of, literally everything, environment, other people around them, appearance. And that's fascinating that, again, certainly significant suggestive evidence that there really is life on other planets, and we can see that in near-death experiences.
And do all of them report being human in their life, or could people be birds or whatever, animals?
Yeah, we're back to very rare again.
Yeah.
But we've had some people rare, and I can recall one in particular where they were aware of their prior life, and they said they initially started conscious being fish-like in an ocean, and they were aware of their evolution through more advanced conscious physical beings on Earth, and then progressed all the way up to their earthly life. So that's, again, I don't want to put too much emphasis on an anecdotal report, but that's just dang fascinating. So again, one of those things you need, really gives you pause to reflect on just exactly how detailed these life reviews and reincarnation awarenesses can be.
Right. What are some of the more interesting recollections of prior lives? I mean, you mentioned being trapped or not trapped, but living in a city with walls and worrying about people breaking through. Like, what are some of the more interesting prior lives that people have described?
We had a very fascinating person who was aware of their prior life around World War I Germany. And they were not a soldier, but they were living in a city and had detailed awareness of what the city was like, streets, buildings, etc. And this person actually traveled to Germany after their near-death experience and was literally aware of new street. I mean, the buildings were very different, street names were very different, but he knew the layout from his prior life recollection of that area, and that's one of the more evidential prior life memories that we have going on. He was well aware of how important that was and took a lot of notes on that. Mm-hmm.
Do people recall lives that have happened back to back to back? Mm. And the reason I ask the question is because I'm curious if we have any sense for the amount of time that people spend in this heavenly realm outside of the human body. In between lives.
Sure, and that's a great question because there does seem to be that existence in that afterlife heavenly realm in between lives. So that's something that seems to be a common theme in this. But I just don't have the data to really say, here's an average, here's a range. It would be, as you would expect, obviously you have to have died in this earthly life prior to, at least in Earth timeline, beginning your next earthly life. So that's about all we have, and that can be at least a short interval of time, as best I can recall, or it can be a very, very long interval of earthly time. But that's really about as far as I can say, based on without actually crunching the data and looking at it carefully.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder if, and this is going to be impossible to know, I think, because we can only hear about the experiences that go so far. I mean, you can only take your NDE so far before it's either time to say I'm checked out with Earth. I'm done. I'm doing this heaven thing, or I'm coming back. So but I wonder, like, do people have the choice to go back to to go into a specific life? Are they choosing their life when they reincarnate?
First of all, in near-death experiences, when they have prior life remembrance, essentially, I do not recall any near-death experience saying they had a choice. In other words, I chose to go here. I had these options, and this is what I wanted to do. So they seem to be, boom, they happen without them consciously being aware of a decision or a choice to have that particular prior life or that particular time in the prior life. It's just, boom, they're there without, any seeming input or conscious awareness or decision on their part.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What about this? I think I heard you talk about this point of no return, where, and can you describe what that is and what it means?
Yeah. Especially in the more detailed near-death experiences, and typically in this heavenly realm, the near the end of the experience, and I know what to look for if they're coming up on, if they're walking down a path with spiritual beings, and they're coming up on a bridge, a creek that crosses a path, there's a chasm there. I know darn good and well what that means. It means they're nearing the end of the near-death experience, and especially with other beings around them, that means they're going to be at a moment of decision. They almost never cross over that chasm, bridge, creek, or whatever the barrier is called, near the path of the end of their near-death experience. But when they are ultimately there, there's a couple different ways the near-death experience can end. The significant majority involve them just returning to their earthly life, basically involuntarily. Boom, they're there. There may be some interaction, and then they're back in their earthly life, fighting for their life and what nearly killed them. Now, there's a distinct minority of them that have a very fascinating discussion with these other spiritual beings. And those are the ones that are given a choice. In other words, they're very clear. What would you like to do? Would you like to return to your earthly life, or would you like to stay here? And this is where it gets just dang interesting. I mean, here they're
right now. This is where it gets interesting.
Well, yeah, it's been interesting. We've had some other interesting things to talk about too. But all right, I stand corrected. There's another interesting thing here. But I mean, how awesome is this? They're given a choice about returning, and here is their prior earthly life. They've lived decades, typically, of earthly life. Everyone they knew, everything they knew, their friends, family, loved one, was that prior existence prior to their near-death experience. So one would think that if you had a choice about staying in that earthly, returning to that earthly physical life or staying in that heavenly realm, well, obviously you'd want to go back to what that familiarity, friends, family, loved ones, marriage, children. But that's not what is observed. Out of many, many near-death experiences that have a choice, the substantial majority don't want to leave that heavenly physical or heavenly realm. They do not want to return to their earthly life. And the reason for that is they feel, again, that heavenly realm is their real home. They feel connected there. They feel that overwhelming love, connection, peace. The other beings around them, their consciousness is greatly accelerated, at least the great majority of them. So they really feel that is where they want to stay. And certainly they're not having any of that misery, discomfort, or issues that are in their earthly physical body is causing them to nearly die. So it's fascinating that the great majority make a very conscious decision and will often argue with the spiritual beings there that, no, I don't want to return there. And it can literally be a heated interaction if they're given a choice and the beings think they ought to go back to their earthly life. So at that point in time, in this dialogue, they may be, the spiritual beings will often work with them. And one of the things I see, and we have a small series of this, for the spiritual beings to help entice the people having a near-death experience to choose to go back to the earthly life, we have a small series where they're shown what happens in the future if they stay in the heavenly realm. And they see the misery, the sadness of the people they left behind on earth, how their life may be much more difficult. And we even have a small series where they're shown their funeral if they choose to stay in that heavenly realm. And that's just, man, I get chills sometimes seeing these types of near-death experiences. For instance, here was one where near the front row, he saw his funeral, and there were like some couple 2-year-olds laughing and giggling because they didn't know it was a funeral. They didn't know the sadness. They weren't aware of the permanent loss of this person who was a part of their life. So once the near-death experiencers are shown that, are aware of their impact, the negative impact of people on the earth, or even get a sense of their own funeral, then they will ultimately make that decision to return to their earthly life. And by the way, that's tough, as you can imagine, for the spouses of these people. If they're, the near-death experiencer is honest and say, look, here's what the experience was, and I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to come back to you. And I've known some people that had near-death experiences. That's tough for a spouse. It just takes a long time for the spouse to really get just how profoundly gripping, loving, connected they felt on the afterlife. And it would really take an enlightened spouse to really understand why the person who had the near-death experience wanted to stay in that heavenly realm. I mean, that's just how powerfully positive, interconnecting, embracing the heavenly realm is. And that's sort of a vivid, very poignant demonstration of just how powerful that experience is there.
I'm going to switch the topic here a little bit. Obviously, still on topic, but people who have had supernatural experiences, people who have seen apparitions or heard a voice of someone who's not in the room with them. These, again, are not, people can believe or not believe these people who have had these experiences, but to the people who have had these experiences, it's very real. And I'm one of those people who have had a lot of these types of experiences in my life, and I haven't in about 7 or so years since I've been in my new house. But at my old house, it was relatively frequently, and it was not just me; it was my wife and it was our kids as well that we would have experiences. And even prior to that, I'd had experiences. My first real experience, and I'll take just a second to tell this story here. It happened in 2004, and I was at a castle in France, in Bagnols, which is a little bit outside of Lyon. I was there with my wife, and we didn't have any kids. It was '04, and we were staying there for 3 nights, and it was this 11th century castle called Château de Bagnols, and ghosts were the farthest thing from my mind. I wasn't thinking about them at all in any way. I wasn't thinking that this place was haunted in any way. I got up to use the restroom in the middle of the night at this place at about 3 a.m. and it was a rectangular shaped room, and the bed was on this side and the restroom was over here. And I went into the restroom and looked out the window, and there was a window over here, and there was a man standing in front of the window, and he was looking out the window, and he was maybe 5'7", 5'8". He was a stocky, kind of a fat guy on the larger side. He had ruffled hair on the side that was just past his ears that went all the way down. He was wearing a bluish suit. He had again, whitish hair, pale skin. And all I could see skin-wise was his head, essentially. But he was looking away from me out the window, and I just looked at him. This wasn't like corner of the eye, kind of saw it and then looked away. I saw this thing, and I saw this thing for a good 5 seconds, and that was a long ass period of time to be looking at this thing. I got up and flicked on the lights, and there was nothing there. And I went back to sleep, and I didn't tell my wife about it. And 2 nights later, we were there for 3 nights. My wife and I are going to sleep, and she rolls over in bed and grabs me and, oh my God, I just saw a ghost. And I didn't tell her what I saw. Like, I didn't tell her anything that I saw. I hadn't mentioned it. I was just kind of went back into bed. I didn't fall asleep, and I'd kind of been thinking about it, but this was our last night of our last hotel of the trip, and we were going back to America after the 3rd night, and this was the 3rd night that we were falling asleep, and she saw the same thing that I saw, standing there in front of the window. And people back then didn't believe me. People still don't believe me, and it's one of those things where I have no reason to make this up, and I have everything to lose in terms of credibility. I've been telling this story for 20 years since it happened, but I know it was there, and she will tell you exactly. This is exactly what happened. I'll take a lie detector test. I actually want to get a lie detector test set up in this studio for various times. I'm going to be the first one to take it and to start it, but to have people, experiencers come in, abductees come in, people who have had near-death experiences come in, and kind of get them to take take a lie detector, take a test, and kind of, and then talk about their story, and then to really get a truthful, to make sure that the people that I'm communicating with are being completely honest. But so that's coming. But I wanted to share that because I wanted to let you know that I have been looking forward to this conversation for years, not knowing who you were, of course, but years, literally years, and Ryan could see it all week, and my kind of excitement for this talk and to sort of understand it because of some of the things that I've experienced throughout my life, and that being the biggest single life-changing event that probably sent me down this mind wide open kind of a path of, I want to explore ancient Civ, I want to explore paranormal, I want to explore UFO more. It was kind of always something that I was into, but I don't think without that experience that I'd be sitting here talking to you right now. And whether it doesn't matter if you're if you're a believer of these experiences that people have or not. People have these experiences, and they believe that they have these experiences. So I just wonder how that soul that I saw in that room got there.
Yeah.
Did he turn down the beings and say, it's not my time yet, and I'm going to stay here for another 1,000 years, and now he's, just sitting there staring out a window for all of eternity. Any thoughts there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Matt, thanks for sharing that. I'll tell you, I believe it because we've had scores and scores of people share, what we call entity encounters. They're sometimes called ghosts, but the fact that both you and your wife saw exactly the same thing, and I'm sure shared in great detail about it was, and we've said earlier, what's real is consistently observed, basic scientific principle, consistently observed. That was reality, so that really happened. No doubt about that. I think one thing I could speculate on is, there's a much bigger universe as broadly defined than we're aware of in our earthly ongoing existence. I mean, exactly like what you experienced. I mean, there's a lot of, what we call non-ordinary, and yet it's important types of things. I mean, I would speculate one possibility out of many possibilities could be that there could be a intelligent, divine God, some conscious entity in the afterlife that said, Matt, you have the potential, you have the, maybe you need a push in the direction of developing this interest by this type of personal experience, opening your awareness, your thinking about this, your consciousness to make you open to exploring this in a way very few people have the potential to do. And that through your explorations and your sharing, exactly like these podcasts, you could have a very valuable, positive, loving, compassionate impact in this world that you might not have had you not had that experience. And that could be the product of a divine, loving consciousness.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, had not really considered that, to be honest with you, but that makes total sense. Really well said. Thank you. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for understanding that it happened, because people, I'll say that and people will be like, no, you didn't see that. And it's like,
well, you could say go talk to Dr. Long. Dr. Long says I did, and he's studied entities times huge numbers.
Right. Yeah. Well, good. Yeah. So there were a couple of big things that you have yet to release or talk about on anywhere else yet. So I was excited to kind of, to break some of that news with the audience today. Which one do you want to start with?
Okay. Shoot, Matt, you're saving the best for last, aren't you? It is very deliberate, isn't it? And I'll expand on that a little bit. Just within the last week, several weeks, I've done some research that I have not yet shared with the world, and I thought this would be an outstanding opportunity to share. So I think some really important insights from near-death experience that I've just one of them I pretty much finished the research on. The others were well underway. And yeah, this is exciting. So let's start out with the fact that we've talked earlier about the fact that near-death experiences can occur worldwide in a variety of different cultures, prior belief systems. So we had just a few days ago, where I live up in Kentucky, my work day was canceled, so we had a snow day. So what do you do when you have a free day and it's snow and you can't go outside? Well, I did research. So that allowed me to crunch the data that I had from non-Western near-death experiences. Now let's define that. Non-Western, I and others define that as being countries that are not largely Judeo-Christian. I mean, these are like the Buddhist, the countries, Hindu-believing countries predominantly, Islam-believing countries. So these are countries that have radically different cultures than our typical Western type of countries, such as here in America. Now, the reason that's important to study these types of near-death experiences is that if anyone ever had any thinking that near-death experiences, what occurs is due to pre-existing cultural or religious beliefs, this is the best way to investigate that possibility, is through these very culturally different near-death experiences. So because we have such a huge volume of near-death experiences on our most recent version of the survey, we were able to identify 51 people that had non-Western near-death experiences. And we did it with all the usual care and criteria for near-death experiences. And as part of that, so here is the largest study of non-Western near-death experiences that had ever been reported. And we'll do it right here and right now for you, Matt, because, well, heck, you asked. So here's what we found. What defines a near-death experience? There's a research criteria called the NDE scale, and that's a series of 16 questions that have been validated to help determine what's a near-death experience and not a near-death experience. So we had, through my wife's heroics, Jody's incredible actions, she was able to get volunteers to translate our survey into over 30 different languages. And that included a number of different languages that are predominant in non-Western countries. So we used exactly the same survey, exactly the same questions, exactly the same NDE scale questions. So for the first time in history, we could compare a large number of non-Western near-death experiences with typical Western near-death experiences, comparing apples with apples, filling out the same version of the survey. So that's never been done, especially with that number of non-Western near-death experiences. So when I was literally a few days old that I finally got all the data, crunched it, ran my chi-square analysis, and I was amazed. Matt, I found that these non-Western near-death experiences are strikingly similar to typical Western near-death experiences. Out of the 16 of these near-death experience scale questions that define a near-death experience, only one was statistically different between the two groups, between the non-Western and the Western near-death experiences. So again, everything that we've talked about here today that occurs during a near-death experience, out-of-body experience, tunnel, emotions, visiting these beautiful unearthly realms, life reviews, everything, you see these in non-Western near-death experiences, and you see them in about the same proportion as Western near-death experiences. So once again, I am amazed in my near-death experience research that it doesn't seem to make any difference whether you're, say, a Muslim in Egypt or a Hindu in India or a Christian in the United States or someone with no particular religious belief. Anywhere on the world that you have a near-death experience, what happens, what occurs, is going to be strikingly similar. This study almost single-handedly refutes the skeptic concerns that the content, what happens in a near-death experience, is a consequence of pre-existing cultural or religious beliefs. No, not a trace of that in this. So it's my honor and privilege to bring forward that leading-edge research, largest study of non-Western near-death experiences, and your viewers are going to have, at this point, been the first to hear about it. I'm going to present this later at a national meeting, and we'll be writing that up for scholarly paper publication. But that's what it'll be.
Nice, nice. That's so cool. That's so exciting. And it's got to just validate everything that you've worked on and that you've been talking about.
Yeah, and when I go into these types of research, I mean, I'm always going to let the evidence lead me.
Sure.
I mean, you go into this and say, wow, I thought these were similar experiences around the world, but you don't really know for sure. I mean, it's my subjective impression, but after you get all the experiences, do the research, and then crunch the numbers, look at the data, Now I can say it definitively. They are strikingly similar worldwide. Actually, I had a pretty good idea that was happening because I published a scholarly paper with an Iranian near-death experience researcher I mentioned briefly earlier. In that paper, we had about 20 Iranian Muslim near-death experiences in our written conclusion. In that paper, again, the content of these Iranian Muslim near-death experiences strikingly similar to typical Western near-death experiences, but we weren't really comparing apples with large groups of people completing the same survey and the same questions. We were able to do that. Now we can more definitively than we've ever been able to say before. Anywhere on the planet you have a near-death experience, what happens, what occurs is going to be remarkably similar.
Wow, that's awesome. That's really cool. That adds a lot. I mean, not that the current body of work needed any, additional. I mean, it's already corroborated by so many people, but that's fantastic. That's really cool, and it just validates everything that you've been talking about.
Yeah, it's really just yet another of many lines of evidence for the reality of near-death experience, and
Right.
we could talk about that. Skeptics, that believe that near-death experiences are a result of prior cultural or religious beliefs. That's literally one of over 30 different skeptical explanations of near-death experience that have been proposed over decades. Now, the reason there's so many of these skeptical explanations of near-death experience floating around is very simple. There's no one or several of these explanations skeptics have come up with that explains anything that happens during a near-death experience, let alone this large volume, the totality of the evidence, much of which we've discussed here today. And so as a result of that, skeptics the skeptics themselves can't agree on any one or several explanations as a group. So that's why they have over 30 and keep coming up with a new one, it seems, every year or two. There's nothing that anybody in the skeptical arena has come up with that explains how near-death experiences could be due to physical brain function at all.
Yeah, it's to be skeptical is one thing. When you're skeptical of experiencers, you're really just, I mean, when you have this large of a body of people who have experienced the same thing, and you're sitting there telling them that what they've seen is not true, it's not real.
Yeah.
I mean, the gall, the
gall.
just the nerve that people have to sit there who haven't experienced anything for themselves. It just doesn't happen to fit into their belief system. And so they're coming up with reasons why it's not real so that they can maintain their belief system.
That's it. Matt, that is a great point, and I'm going to take it and run a little bit. One of the survey questions that we have asked people that had near-death experiences very directly, at the current time, what do you believe about the reality of your experience? Definitely real, probably not real, definitely not real. Survey, 834 near-death experiencers responded to that, and about 94% stated their experience was definitely real. So you're right. I mean, just the arrogance of a skeptics to deny the overwhelming large number of people that overwhelmingly believe in the reality of their near-death experience. And then on top of that, when the skeptics provide explanations for near-death experience, that's crap. It's technically hypotheses. In other words, they're saying this possibly might explain how it occurs. It's a hypothesis, not an explanation. And so how do you determine if the hypothesis holds water or not? Well, really easy. Does a hypothesis explain what's observed? Well, heck no. It doesn't explain anything we see in near-death experiences, let alone the totality. It's just a vivid example, and you've run into this and I've run into that, about just how closed-minded to the point of just being downright weird some of these skeptics can be.
Yeah. It gets strange when you get into people's beliefs and the stories that they make up to make reality fit into their beliefs. Yeah. So you mentioned that there was one question out of the 16 that was not statistically whatever. What was the question?
Yeah, this happened so quick, and but it was some question to the effect of like. It's one of the sort of the ND scale research questions, but it was, I felt, either you didn't have this, or I felt one and united with the world, or one and united with the universe. And right off the bat, in near-death experience, we talked about that. They often come away with that awareness of the unity or oneness of all. So it's a very good question, but geez, you can see how that might not translate. I mean, how, one or unity or feeling at one, I'm kind of suspicious that that is, these non-English, non-Western countries, I mean, they certainly have a very different culture, and they may conceptualize awareness of being, one or at unity with the world or universe. That might be a very difficult concept to accurately translate. So given that 15 out of 16 had no statistical difference, I'm pretty sure that that's just something that's just a difficult concept to accurately translate, and that's probably what's going on here.
Yeah. What else? What else was there?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I've been diligent lately, so again, here's another scoop for your viewing audience here, as if non-Western near-death experiences weren't enough. Another thing, Matt, that I've been looking at is what I consider to be perhaps the most, or at least among the most evidential of near-death experience types of accounts. And these are ones that occur under general anesthesia. Now, look, if you're under general anesthesia, under that blanket of sleep, and probably most people have experienced that, I mean, boom, you're conscious, you're you're unconscious. Gosh, we do general anesthesia because you're cutting on the body and you don't want them to have any feeling of pain or sensation or anything. So general anesthesia in general is a complete blanket of sleep. You don't have any sensory awareness at all at the time you're under general anesthesia. However, there's a mercifully small percentage of people that have complications, either of the anesthesia or the surgery or the pre-existing accident or illness that led to the operation being necessary in the first place. So there's a very small percentage of people whose heart stops. They have cardiac arrest during general anesthesia. Obviously, that's very carefully monitored. I mean, I've been there. I've been, as a physician, I've been trained in the operating. I've been there. And they very carefully monitor heartbeat. So when you have your heart stop, that you know that, and you know it immediately, you know it vividly. So I have at this point a small series of near-death experiences where they were clearly, by my retrospective review, under general anesthesia at that time, and their heart stopped. And how do we know that? Because at the time their heart stopped, they had that out-of-body experience. Boom, consciousness above their body, aware of them body physically down on the operating room table, aware of the panic in the operating room as they had that unexpected complication. Their heart stopped, and believe me, that causes a lot of panic and trouble. So here they are observing their own resuscitation while under general anesthesia in the operating room. And then they go on to have what's typically a very detailed near-death experience. They may go through that tunnel, be in the unearthly realm. But in this small series that I have, they not only were under general anesthesia, they not only observed their own cardiac arrest, their heart stoppage, observed their own resuscitation, but then beyond that, they had the healthcare team come back and validate what they saw at the time they were under general anesthesia, at the time their heart stopped. This is some of the most profoundly evidential near-death experience accounts imaginable.
Right.
There's absolutely no other explanation for this, absolutely no way physical brain function could do this. The only rational explanation for these types of near-death experiences are exactly what the near-death experiencers themselves, what they experienced, what they believed, that there really was consciousness apart from the body when it should be, if you will, doubly impossible.
Yeah, so what can a skeptic say to that?
The only choice they have is to disbelieve the near-death experiencers.
Right,
Heck, if you're a skeptic, I can put you in touch with these people, and you can go.
No,
they won't. It's really sad that people, especially when you have people all around the world have encountered entities, ghosts, as you described, but people all around the world have described near-death experiences. To blow off that huge volume of data just because it doesn't fit into the skeptic's narrow-minded view of the world is really sad. It's not scientific, I might add, too.
Right.
A scientist starts out with observation. You observe what people describe. You observe the experiences they have, and then you develop hypotheses. That's exactly what I did. And then you look for the evidence that either supports or opposes a hypothesis, and then on that body volume of evidence, you make a determination as to what it really is. So that's why, again, near-death experiences are, in a word, real.
Yeah, yeah. What is there one or two that really stand out from that type of a near-death experience from the general anesthesia? Like a story, a recount of what the person saw and
Oh,
experienced.
yeah. I mean, they're all somewhat similar. I mean, just to pick one out of that small series I have, and I don't even remember. I mean, I'm looking over a lot of these experiences, but there's no question they're under general anesthesia. Why? Because this one had their abdomen open. They had some kind of abdominal surgery that they were doing, and believe me, when you have your abdomen open, you're under general anesthesia and you're asleep. So this person this was an allergy, a severe allergy to some kind of medication that they received. And so as a result of that, their heart stopped and boom. So there they were, and they were typically above their body, sort of at a side. And there they were observing their body being open. Now they often have like gowns, covering the surgical area, so it's not as bad as it sounds. But I mean, they're under general anesthesia, and what they describe is it's not like what you see on TV where crash carts mystically appear and there's a calm, active, professional efforts at resuscitation. This is what really happens is panic. There can be unprofessional behavior. Unfortunately, it's usually the doctor who is an anesthesiologist that are very unhappy their patient's coding. Panic. They can sense the emotions of people there, frightened, and horrified even, and that's all vividly. That's what really happens when your heart stops and you're under general anesthesia. I mean, that's a huge deal. I mean, you not only have to resuscitate them, you've got the operative whole. They're open, their body's open, and you have to deal with finishing it up. So when they were able to observe that and who was doing what and what they said. And unfortunately, at least, especially a long time ago, physicians would be very reluctant, or often reluctant, to tell people that they had a cardiac arrest, that their heart stopped during general anesthesia. I mean, they'd be afraid to tell them that. They'd be afraid to frighten them. But in modern times, they're much more physicians feel obligated to disclose that. I mean, if you had your heart stop during anesthesia, you need to know that. You need to follow up.
Right.
You better check you could get an EKG, electrocardiogram, measure your heart make sure there's no permanent damage, because that's a big deal. That's a huge physiological insult to have your heart stop, especially during general anesthesia. And if it was an allergic reaction, you dang sure need to disclose that in the modern era to your patients so you don't get that particular drug again. So now in modern era, we're seeing more disclosure of that. And then as part of that disclosure, the near-death experiencer will say, hey, look, here's what I saw, and can describe in detail, often to the embarrassment of the doctor, hey, whoops, that's embarrassing what they were cussing or whatever. And so, for them to bring back what would be considered an unexpected observation of, panic, crash cart not being their issues, trouble trying to bring them back to life, I mean, that adds to the validity of the observations. And then the healthcare team always essentially astonished. How could you know that? Who told you? Well, we know who told you. She saw it. He saw it. And so as a result of that, we have these literally validated, not only out-of-body observations, but later validated that this was real. This is when you had your near-death experience, and that's exactly the life-threatening event that happened. So again, some of the strongest series of near-death experiences proving that they are absolutely real and cannot possibly be due to physical brain function. So I'm still gathering them. Again, I emphasize it's a work in progress, but we have enough of these reports lined up that it's clearly part of the pattern. This really happens during near-death experiences. Nice. And they can go on typically to have very typical, often detailed near-death experiences after that out-of-body experience.
Wow. So that's crazy. Does anybody ever like draw what they see? Yeah. So you're hovering over a group of doctors and they're all starting to freak out, and I'm just envisioning a spirit that is so does I guess question A, do things look in the physical world the same as they would if the soul that you are is looking down? Does it look the same as it does when you're looking through your eyeballs? I guess that's kind of question one. And then question two, Does anybody ever draw what this heavenly realm looks like and like attempt to just picture it for us?
Yeah. First of all, what they observe in all of these out-of-body experiences, and obviously we have like thousands now of these observations, they're generally what you would expect through physical. I mean, it's analogous to it. Again, you can't possibly be physical when your consciousness is over your physical body. But what they're seeing, it doesn't seem to be distorted. There seems to be vividly accurate down to finest details. And we've had people report, serial numbers on equipment. We've had people report, that there was on the top of the fan in the operating room a label that they could not possibly have known about. So, all of these things are basically they are the reality of physical earthly life, just being seen through non-physical awareness and that out-of-body experience. So that's it. You almost never have things like what you see in the afterlife where beings may be translucent or transparent or, predominantly light. Or you just don't see that described in observing earthly out-of-body experience events. And then secondly, to get on to your second part of your question there, has anyone ever drawn that? God, I wish we should, I'd love to have asked our near-death experiencers to draw this. We have, very, very few people that actually do draw some of what they saw. Okay, here's one vivid example of that. There was it was an extremely young child, about age 2 or something, right around, even barely 2, who had a life-threatening event and had a near-death experience. And then after that, she would tell her mother basically about her actually she didn't say it, but she became verbal about a year later and then started immediately telling her mother about her near-death experience and some of the experiences there. So part of that was she was in heaven. And what was in heaven, and don't forget it's an extremely young child, well, there was a cookie there. And the child drew a picture of the cookie, and here was a huge cookie, and there was all sorts of little circles around it. She said, those are lights. She had no way of knowing that. That's not part of her earthly life. This was literally what was being a part of her near-death experience in a way that she could not have possibly imagined. So we actually have a copy of that picture of the cookie in heaven from a pre-verbal person who was able to communicate that only after they became verbal. But other researchers have collected some of these. That would make an absolutely fascinating additional study of near-death experience. I'd love to have a book published of people drawing pictures of that. We have seen that, and it's analogous to what we've been talking here. You have to draw the picture analogous to what we know here on Earth, and yet it's not of this earth and non-physical in any way. And yet it's one more way that I think near-death experiencers have the potential to convey the absolutely amazing unearthly experiences they've had to help us, the rest of us, in some way understand a little bit better.
I think we'll close it out here in a minute because I've kept you for a long time today.
It's okay.
And very much appreciate your time and your knowledge.
I love it.
It's fascinating. But bouncing back to the non-Western report just for a quick second, what was the craziest or what was the most memorable for you out of all of those non-Western reports that the experience? What was the most memorable experience?
Oh, geez. Again, we're picking out a 51. I almost feel like we're diminishing the others, but I'm going to we'll do this. So this was in a non-Western country, and I don't remember the specific one, but that was in the group. This person had his heart stopped while he was going down a street, cardiac arrest. So boom, he went down, consciousness up, that out-of-body experience, and he was able to see his body down there and people rushing up to him and, what do you do when someone's down and unconscious, trying to get some help. And they were all, concerned, obviously anxious too. So he went and did that. And this is one of these people that had their out-of-body experience where their consciousness left the area of their physical body and traveled a considerable distance. So interestingly, his awareness traveled to the building, and it was up some stories, where his wife was working. And he was looking through the window at his wife working on a computer. And he was able to see that his wife was looking up housing in this far distant city from where they lived in.
Wow.
And, and he's like, of course he had no idea what was going on. So he went on to have a very detailed near-death experience, fortunately recovered. And when he recovered and was talking about it with his wife, he said, okay, here's what I saw. I was looking at your computer And here you are looking at housing in this city far from us. And we've never, what was going on? We never talked about that. And what happened is his wife had just very recently got a job offer for a job in that far city, and she was not willing to discuss it with her husband because you want to create concern, but she was literally thinking about it through exploring housing in that city that she'd been offered a job in, and that was the first time her husband became aware of what was going on with that.
Wow.
Absolutely impossible for him to have known that had his consciousness not been physically there,
right,
looking into that window.
Right. That's incredible. Yeah. I mean, I know that you hear stories like, and you study stories like this constantly.
Yeah.
But that's a really, really cool.
It is. Yeah. It's a part of my life. I mean, these absolutely extraordinary. This is extraordinary to you and any viewer, but gosh, to my wife Jody and I, this is literally just a part. Every week we read more near-death experiences, and this is literally. In fact, I would be fascinated if I saw a near-death experience that seemed unreal or hallucinatory. They're so rare, something that breaks the pattern. But I mean, this is just a vivid, ongoing part of our life, and it's just part of the amazing, striking consistency of near-death experiences all around the world.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great hobby, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, it's my second full-time job.
Right,
actually.
right. Yeah. No, but it's super important work that you're doing, and I mean, it's obviously extraordinarily enlightening. I think that if people could, the more people that understand this work and that know what you're doing, I think it's going to help more and more people. Yeah. I think just to find a sense of peace and find a sense of calm and know that it's going to be okay. I mean, it's such important work, and just want to thank you for what you're doing, because it's huge.
Well, I really appreciate those kind words. It's been a huge labor of love, but I've really enjoyed it. I'm honored and privileged to have this path in my life where so many people have the confidence in what we're doing to share some of their deepest, most profound accounts of what happened to them in their life, and then have the opportunity to share that in the world. And very important point there. I mean, if people had, reading, if you read, you can go to my website, nderf.org, stands for the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. But I would challenge your viewers, I'll bet if you go there and on the top tab you see experiences, go down to exceptional experiences. We call it exceptional archives. I will bet if you read even 10 near-death experiences in that list, or especially 20 or 30, it could literally change your life. You're going to see over and over not only what we talked about here, but these deeper messages, the profound importance of love, that connection we all have, that unity, and that profound reassurance that we are far more than our physical earthly life, that each and every one of us are going to have an afterlife, a wonderful afterlife, and that is an incredibly profoundly positive message for each and every person.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and if the reincarnation component of this is the truth, what does that mean for humanity? I mean, it's like if we have to come back to this place, if all of these past lives are earthly lives, then that means that our future lives are earthly lives. And so if we know that we have to come back to the earth, we probably make different decisions than we're making today in this life. We probably wouldn't trash the place as much, not to go down that path. But I mean, you probably want you want the earth in 50 years or 100 years to be able to sustain life.
That's a really good point. I hadn't even thought of that, but you're right. I think reincarnation is yet another vivid line of thinking about how important the earth is. I mean, it's been the habitat for our prior earthly existences, very important existences. We, as in our current earthly life, had lessons, insights that are very important to our eternal soul selves, and all the more important to maintain Earth, not, as you say, not to trash it out, but to keep it as healthy and vibrant as possible and full of life, so that people in the future can have future earthly carnations and, go on. I mean, just reincarnations and just regular earthly life, so that they can have the best opportunity possible to have all the abundance and lessons from Earth in as positive an environment as is possible.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's interesting to like think about if population is growing or population is shrinking, what happens to those souls? How are we getting additional souls unless we're just increasing the percentage of NPCs? And how did the souls decrease? In a time of dramatic population decrease. Have you put much thought into that?
Yep.
Yeah.
First of all, a little bit of history. It's estimated about 100 billion people of humans have ever existed on Earth. So, there's a lot of us in the past that have the potential to reincarnate, a lot of prior lives that are offering potential. So, certainly populations go up, go down, especially for people that recall multiple prior earthly lives. It's one of those things I just don't. Well, I've thought about it. That doesn't mean I understand it. I'm very aware that it's a reality, but I think it's one of those mysteries that I don't understand again how it works. How did all 100 billion people have prior lives, or did they have prior existences on other planets before human beings existed on Earth? So it's just one of these fascinating mysteries, and it's really what makes near-death experience research exciting. There's just so much that we don't know, and yet what we do learn, what we do finally ultimately figure out from near-death experience is all converging on that understanding about very important things, importance of our earthly life, significance, how it all fits together, and it's just all ultimately every step of the way these lessons that we've learned, including from reincarnation. Profoundly positive insights, even if we don't understand them. And we don't have to understand them all now. I think it's that mystery, don't you think, Matt? It's that mystery, that wonder that just keeps you searching. It keeps you open to other possibilities. It keeps you exploring. It keeps you, basically being open to discoveries and pushing forwards that knowledge, not only for our own, but knowledge we can share with all of humanity in a very important way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well said. Well, this has to be, I would think, the most comprehensive discussion on NDEs probably that exists on the internet. I mean,
I think you're right, and I think that's absolutely true because this has been such an amazing interview here. So I think that's really important. I think any viewer here can listen to this and come away. I mean, it's a lot of information. I really realize that, and it's somewhat challenging if it kind of is different from what beliefs your viewers might have had. But it's that exactly what we were just saying. Keep open-minded. Keep that investigative spirit. Keep that awareness and acceptance and openness to mystery. Keep exploring, learn in your own life, and if you're interested in near-death experience, heck. There's a lot of good material out there. Obviously this podcast is going to be a sentinel event for being a positive source of material. But the more you learn about near-death experiences, I can essentially assure you, the more positively, profoundly, life-changing that you will find it.
Love it. Yeah. Well, fantastic. Well, I've got just a little, I give my guests all a little going away gift.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I don't always do it on camera, but wanted to.
I love this. A huge thanks. I love, we've talked about this. I love this Egyptian stoneware. It's exactly that kind of wonder and the mystery of there's beautiful. Thank you.
These are one for your wife as well, since she joined us down here.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. And she's the webmaster, so this is really... We really appreciate this. It's a vivid reminder of sort of that tying together the ancient mystery and what we have to learn with our continued search to learn about it and looking forward to knowing more in the future. And this is great.
Yep.
We have, but wait, there's more.
There's more.
I love this. Yeah. This is the world's greatest.
It's fantastic.
This is the Beall Limitless.
Yeah, that's the cup,
and I really appreciate that. That will be at my bedside.
Cool.
And it's an excellent source of ice water.
Yep.
Where we have. So thank you much. I really appreciate it. And a huge thanks also for this absolutely, literally sentinel, fantastic interview that we've shared today.
Agree. Yeah, I think we made something super special, and hopefully people get a lot out of it, and hopefully a lot of people see it and share it and like, and because I think again it's super important information, and it's not something that enough people talk about, enough people study, enough people realize, enough people know about. So again, very important work, and just really can't thank you enough for coming down.
I really appreciate that. And for the viewers, if you find this to be very meaningful and significant, informative, please feel that you can share this with other people and share the significantly, powerfully positive messages shared here today with anybody that you'd like.
Love it. Love it. All right. Well, that's a wrap.
All right.
Yeah. Appreciate it, sir.
You bet.
Yep. Great pod.